Chapter 1. The Bed That Was Still Imprinted. The morning air in St. Ives was clean and briny, as though the sea itself had taken it upon its shoulders to sweep away the dust of the town's narrow lanes. Yet within the tall windows of the Glendower Hotel, a hush lay that was not of the pleasant seaside kind. By 8:30, the whisper had travelled from chambermaid to receptionist, from porter to concierge. A guest had been found dead. It was Mrs. Althea Burnley, widow of a wealthy ship owner and a woman whose arrival 3 days earlier had been noticed by all. She had come with trunks enough for a month's stay, though she had reserved her room only until Sunday. Her manner was brisk, almost imperious. Her eyes, sharp grey ones, were the sort that measured people the way a jeweller examines a stone. And yet, beneath the certainty of her bearing, there had been the faintest trace of something guarded, almost furtive. The discovery was made by Elsie, a chambermaid barely 20. She had knocked, received no answer, and, believing her guest to be at breakfast, entered to make the bed. But Mrs. Burnley was not at breakfast. She lay upon the right side of the great brass-framed bed, perfectly still, the counterpane drawn neatly up to her collarbones. One pale hand rested atop the coverlet, the other beneath it. Her face was calm, but not peaceful. The lips pressed faintly together, the eyes half-lidded. The chambermaid's gasp echoed down the corridor. What struck Elsie most, what she repeated later to the housekeeper with a shiver, was that the other half of the bed was untouched. The sheets on the left side were crisp and unwrinkled, the pillow plump and unused. "It was as if she'd lain there all night without moving an inch," Elsie whispered, "and as if she'd been waiting for something to happen." The hotel's physician, Dr. Forland, was summoned. His verdict was cautious: death during sleep, perhaps from heart failure. No signs of struggle, no marks upon the body, save a small, oddly shaped bruise along the base of the throat, a mark he attributed hesitantly to pressure from the stiff collar of her nightdress. Yet, even as he spoke, there was a faint unease in his tone. The police were called. Inspector Creel, tall and spare, with eyes that seemed always to be measuring a person's reliability, arrived with 2 constables. He asked after the woman's acquaintances in the hotel. There were several: Mr. Lionel Greaves, a florid gentleman with a fondness for cards; Miss June Weatherby, a painter of modest success; Colonel Thurston, retired and stiff-spined; and Mrs. Euphemia Latchford, a widow of similar means to Mrs. Burnley, though of softer temperament. Each had spoken with her at one time or another in the lounge or dining hall. From the start, something was odd. The windows in Mrs. Burnley's room were latched from within, the door locked, but the key had been left in the inside lock. The bedside table bore a half-full glass of water. A small travel clock stopped at 3:12 and, most curious of all, a pressed violet, brittle and faded, tucked beneath the lamp. There was no sign of forced entry. Creel's questions yielded little, but he lingered over the detail of the bed. "You say she lay only on one side, and without turning?" he asked Elsie twice. "Yes, sir." Like she was waiting for someone to join her, but they never came. By mid-morning, the manager had done what any man in his position would. He telephoned to London. For though Inspector Creel was competent enough, the matter had the air of one that might, in the wrong hands, be declared an accident and closed, only to leave behind questions that would fester for years. And so, on the noon train, a small man with an immaculately waxed moustache, a bowler hat, and eyes bright with a watchful intelligence, arrived at the hotel. Hercule Poirot surveyed the place as he stepped from the taxi, his gaze passing briefly over the shifting sea beyond before settling on the tall windows of the Glendower. Inside, the hush of unease greeted him like a chill draught. He listened gravely as Inspector Creel outlined the facts. Poirot nodded, his fingertips lightly pressed together. "Mon cher inspecteur," he murmured at last. "It is always instructive, is it not, when the bed tells the first story? But whether that story is the truth or a lie someone wishes us to believe, that we shall discover. And with that, he ascended to Mrs. Burnley's room, where the air still held the faintest trace of violets, and the right side of the bed lay smooth, undisturbed, save for the silent imprint of the woman who would never rise from it again. Chapter 2. The First Clues. Poirot stood just inside the doorway of Mrs. Burnley's room, very still, as if the tiniest draught might carry away what the room wished to tell him. Inspector Creel waited, arms folded, his notebook open, though the pencil lay idle. The chambermaid, Elsie, hovered near the threshold with eyes too wide, while the housekeeper, Mrs. Penn, square-shouldered, competent, kept one hand on the girl's elbow, ready to draw her away should hysteria threaten. "The door," Poirot said softly. "We leave it as we found it when you entered, mademoiselle?" Elsie shook her head. "No, sir. This morning it was locked. I fetched Mrs. Penn. She told me to try again, and when there was no answer, the manager opened with the passkey. Only it wouldn't turn because the guest's key was left inside. We had to fetch Mr. Riggs, the night porter. He pushed the key through with a bit of card beneath. Then Mr. Bennet, the manager, let us in." Poirot inclined his head, absorbing each word. "So, a closed room, apparently. Already we have the drama." He took a single, courteous step into the chamber, eyes sliding over the habits of a life paused in mid-movement. On the dressing table, a hairbrush with a few silver strands, a jewelry roll, its ties loosened, the velvet showing a shallow, vacant niche where something of oval shape had rested. Perhaps a locket, perhaps a watch. Near it, a small bottle of violet water with the hotel label neatly pasted. Poirot leaned closer. A ring of paler wood on the table's surface showed where the bottle had recently stood, and then been moved half an inch left, leaving the dust's faint outline imperfect. The cap, too, bore smudges where careful fingers had tested its tightness. He did not touch. He merely looked, and the looking seemed to press upon the objects until they yielded some part of their story. "Dr. Forland believes the heart," Inspector Creel said. "No real marks, nothing disturbed. No signs of poison to the casual eye. But I don't like that bruise at the throat." "Nor I," said Poirot. "But we will allow it to wait. The order is important. First, this bed." He approached the brass-framed bed as a priest approaches an altar. The counterpane had been turned back and then smoothed up again to the collarbone, as Elsie had said. The right pillow showed that subtle basin a head leaves when it has given itself to sleep. The left pillow was too complacent, too plump. Poirot bent until his gaze was level with the sheet, studying the creases. He singled out a narrow angle, a fold pressed outward by a knee drawn up before sleep, perhaps. Another long, straight channel where an arm had lain along the side. But across the untouched half, the linen held its crisp factory geometry. "Would she habitually sleep on the right?" he asked without looking up. "Mrs. Zapau," Penn answered. "Many ladies do, sir, if they are accustomed to sharing, even when they sleep alone. Habit remains. But this is a wide bed. One turns over in the night." "Unless one expects not to," said Poirot, "or unless one must not." He looked at the left pillow. There, at the lower corner, he found a delicate irregularity, not the hollow of a head, but the smallest stutter in the smooth cotton, as if something had been set there briefly and lifted away. He glanced to the bedside table on the left side. There was none. The only table was to the right, bearing the lamp and the travel clock. On the left, the floorboards were bare. Poirot stooped and studied them. He straightened with a faint, satisfied motion. No dust, but the shallow half-moon of a heel scuff, aligned not parallel to the bed, but at a discreet angle, as of someone standing very close and careful. "The window," he said. Inspector Creel led the way. Both casements were latched. The paint around the catches showed no pry marks. Locked from inside, she was a tidy woman, they say, always made a point of fastening them against the sea mist. Poirot examined the latch and the sill. A grain or two of pale sand had nested in the far corner. He lifted a brow. "St. Ives comes in on your shoes, eh?" Elsie brightened, eager to be helpful. "Oh, yes, sir, but we sweep every morning." "And last night?" "It was after supper I did Mrs. Burnley's turn down," Elsie said. "Just after 9. I made the cocoa in the pantry and took it up on the tray. She always asked for cocoa at 9. Then I did the fire and shook out the rug." "Cocoa," said Poirot. He looked to the tray on the small escritoire by the window. A cup and saucer, rinsed but not washed, stood inverted. The pot was capped, still faintly sweet-smelling. Mrs. Penn murmured that the pantry maid often reclaimed the tray in the morning. On the right-hand table, the half-full water-glass caught Poirot's attention. There was no lipstick smudge on the rim. He tilted his head. Women like Mrs. Burnley, elegant, measured, left traces of themselves, the print of a powder, a faint kiss of rose. Here there was none, but a weak oval fingerprint near the base in the condensation ring's outline, too blurred to read, yet telling him it had been lifted, set down, lifted again. "And the clock?" he asked. Inspector Creel obliged. "Stopped at 3:12. The doctor says the mainspring may have run down." "May have," Poirot repeated. He picked up the clock by its edges and turned it to the light. A faint bruise on the brass backplate, like a fall from a modest height. He set it down gently, then peered at the night lamp. Beneath it, the pressed violet lay like a tiny ceremonial token, its color faded to brownish purple. He smiled without warmth. A romantic keepsake, perhaps, or a message. Mrs. Penn cleared her throat. "She bought those little violets from the florist by the quay yesterday, sir. I saw them among her parcels when she came in." "Ah, then this one was not long in her possession." Poirot let the idea settle. People purchased violets to press for remembrance or to hide what they wished not to forget. He turned to the dressing table again. The open jewelry roll nagged at him with its one empty oval. "Did Mrs. Burnley wear a necklace last night?" Elsie hesitated. "Sometimes a little watch on a ribbon, and a small locket in the mornings." "On a ribbon," murmured Poirot. "Inspecteur, the bruise at the base of the throat. Did it resemble a straight pressure, or a narrow curve?" "A narrow line," Creel admitted. "Doctor thought it could be the edge of a collar." "Or a ribbon drawn tight and then released," Poirot said gently. "We do not conclude. We note." He moved to the escritoire. There, monogrammed hotel stationery lay in a neat stack, and atop it, a blotting pad that had seen recent use. Poirot opened the pad and angled it to the window's light. A faint ghost of indented writing revealed itself. Not enough to read in full, but enough to tease. He took a soft pencil from his pocket and, with feather-light strokes along the page beneath, coaxed shadows into legibility. "Ever trust," he read aloud, "and a name, I think, beneath, but incomplete. Stan." Mrs. Penn made a small sound. "Colonel Thurston, sir. He is staying on the second floor." "Perhaps it is coincidence," Poirot said. "Perhaps it is not. We add it to the little heap." He lifted the blotter again and found, on the next sheet, the slant of different handwriting. A sharper hand, impatient, as if the pen were a weapon. Simply, 10 minutes. No salutation, no signature. "You will say, Inspecteur, that anyone might have written this," Poirot said, returning the pad precisely as he had found it. "And you will be correct. Yet it tells us there was an appointment of brevity. 10 minutes for what? To make a peace? To deliver a warning? To return what was taken?" "What was taken?" Creel asked dryly. "Perhaps nothing," Poirot allowed. "Or perhaps the oval that is missing from the velvet. The locket, the watch. If a thief came, he was neat. The trunks are not rifled, the drawers undisturbed. But people who take with a purpose do not rummage. They select." He paused at the nearest trunk. Its leather corners bore the faint polished shine of recent handling. He bent to the lock. No scratches. The key, tied to a silk ribbon, lay upon the dressing table, too conspicuous, almost theatrical. Poirot glanced at the hearth. The grate held the residue of a coal fire banked and left. On the fender, a single grey ash curled apart from the rest. Paper ash, not coal, thin as lace. He crouched, careful as a cat, and examined it. It crumbled at his breath. He caught a whiff that was not common ash, but the ghost of sealing wax. "A letter burned," he said. "Recently, or the ash would be dispersed. Mrs. Penn, does your staff burn the guest's refuse?" "In the morning, sir, if a guest leaves ash in the grate. But this is not our doing." Poirot rose. His gaze travelled the room once more, not in the sweeping survey of a newcomer, but in the returning look of a friend. He crossed to the wardrobe and opened it. Dresses hung in order of shade, a neatness that pleased him. On the floor stood 2 pairs of walking shoes. One pair's soles showed the sea's fine residue. He picked up the left shoe and frowned. The right heel had a delicate groove scored into the rubber, as if it had caught on a wire or a nail. "Inspector," he said, "who sits nights at the desk in the lobby?" "Riggs until 2, then the junior, Hargreaves, from 2 to 6. "And last night?" "From 3 o'clock to 1:30. Creel scratched his chin. "We'll ask him." "We will," Poirot agreed. "Because our little clock that stopped at 3:12 has the bruise of a fall. I think it stopped not because it had wound down, but because it was dropped and the hands jarred." Dropped when and by whom? There is the question. Elsie made a timid proposal. Perhaps Mrs. Burnley reached to turn it and it slipped. Perhaps. Poirot's smile was kind to her, yet remote in the way kindness is when it stands beside duty. "Yet note that the clock sits to the right of the bed, and our poor lady did not move from the right. Why, then, is the bruise on the back as if made from a different height? We shall not force the answer." He turned to the bed once more and looked at the left pillow's tiny crease. "We shall allow it to come." He asked to see the pockets of the dress she had worn the previous evening. Mrs. Penn produced it, reverently folded. Poirot, with a gloved hand, examined the pockets. A theatre stub from the hotel's small musical recital. A stub of pencil, and, curious and out of place, a tiny square of shiny paper punctured twice, like the stub of a parcel string tie cut cleanly away. "String," Poirot murmured. "A ribbon, a string, a tie. We have many little cousins of the same family." He returned the dress, precise as a magistrate closing a file. The room felt different now, not less mysterious, but more densely so, as if threads that had floated loosely were beginning to twist around an invisible spindle. Poirot glanced to the door. "One last thing, Inspecteur. The key that was left inside, did anyone try it before pushing it out onto the card?" "Bennett did," Creel said. "He tried, and it would not turn." "Because it was turned fully to lock," said Poirot. "That is what one does when one fears interruption, or when one wishes to make a little scene of privacy." He gave a small bow toward the bed, as if acknowledging a co-star. "For the moment, we have enough." He turned to Elsie and Mrs. Penn. "You have both been very clear. Be so kind as to ask the manager to place the staff at our disposal." Then to Creel, with that bird-like brightening of the eyes Hastings would have recognized at once. "We must speak to the guests, the little society of the Glendower, before memory begins to embroider. We will ask few questions, we will listen much, and we will observe who glances toward the stairs when we say the hour 3. Poirot looked once more at the pressed violet beneath the lamp, then at the silk ribbon with its dangling key, then at the empty oval in the velvet roll. He nodded as if to himself. "Yes," he said thoughtfully. "Let us gather them, in the lounge perhaps, where the windows look to the sea and the chairs are arranged as for a small play." Inspector Creel closed his notebook. "The gathering of suspects, then." "Mais naturellement, said Hercule Poirot. "It is time to make the introductions, to see who sits comfortably, who chooses the shadow, and who cannot prevent the hand from straying to the throat." And with that, the little procession moved into the corridor, the air behind them retaining the faintest perfume of violets and the careful silence of a bed that still held the shape of a secret. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The lounge of the Glendower Hotel was a long, gracious room facing the sea, its tall windows set in arched recesses so that light fell in slanted pools across the carpet. On an ordinary morning, it would have been a place of quiet leisure, guests reading the newspapers, sipping tea, or watching the gulls wheel over the breakwater. Now, however, it had the atmosphere of a stage before the curtain rises, each occupant aware that their part is soon to be called. Inspector Creel stood near the fireplace, speaking in low tones to Mr. Bennet, the manager. Poirot, impeccable in a pale grey suit and with the faintest scent of lavender water about him, moved slowly among the chairs, arranging them with almost comic precision, each angled to face the center of the room. Creel watched with a faint frown, but said nothing. One by one the guests arrived, ushered in by the housekeeper with the deference due to those unused to being summoned in such a fashion. First came Colonel Thurston, tall and spare in a tweed jacket, his mustache clipped as neatly as his sentences. He greeted Creel with military brevity, then took a chair stiffly, as if at parade rest. Miss June Weatherby followed, a woman of perhaps 35, with an expressive face and a mane of copper hair bound loosely at her neck. She carried a sketchbook under one arm as though reluctant to leave it even now. Her green eyes darted from Poirot to Creel, then away toward the sea. "Mr. B, sir." Lionel Greaves arrived in a waft of cologne and a rustle of silk lining. He was round in face and figure, his cravat a little too elaborate, his manner ingratiating to the point of discomfort. He greeted everyone effusively, even the colonel, who offered only a curt nod in return. Mrs. Euphemia Latchford came next, plump, kindly-featured, wearing a shade of lavender that echoed the gentleness of her tone. She clasped her handbag to her middle as though it were her talisman. When she spoke, her voice had the faint quaver of someone eager to please yet conscious of her place in the social order. Two others entered together, Mr. and Mrs. Rawlinson, newlyweds from London, their honeymoon stay at the Glendower thus far marked by a constant air of self-sufficiency. He was tall, dark-haired, with an easy smile. She was pale, her fair hair drawn back in a neat chignon, her blue eyes assessing everyone with quiet calculation. Finally, there was Mr. Adrian Field, a writer of travel pieces whose long limbs and narrow tanned face suggested perpetual movement between ports. He gave a brief nod to Poirot and immediately seated himself near the farthest window, as though distance could shield him from inquiry. When all were gathered, Inspector Creel cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for assembling on such short notice. As you know, Mrs. Althea Burnley was found deceased in her room this morning. Dr. Forlan's preliminary opinion suggests natural causes, but certain circumstances require us to speak with you all. Mr. Hercule Poirot, who is assisting us, will explain." Poirot rose slightly from where he stood, bowing with old-world grace. "Mesdames et messieurs, I beg you to be at ease. We do not accuse, we inquire, and we inquire with courtesy, for there is no one here who is not already, in some manner, part of our little drama." His gaze traveled from face to face, noting the slight shifts of posture, the glances exchanged. "I ask only that you answer with candor. For the smallest detail, the thing one dismisses as unimportant, these, very often, are the keys." Colonel Thurston spoke first, his voice clipped. "I take it we're all to be asked where we were at the time." "May we, among other things," Poirot said mildly. "But let us begin instead with your acquaintance with the late Mrs. Burnley. Some of you knew her only since her arrival here. Others may have known her from before. Tell me, how did she seem to you?" It was Mrs. Latchford who answered, her fingers worrying the clasp of her bag. I'd met her at a luncheon in London, perhaps 3 years ago. We had mutual acquaintances in shipping. She was formidable. One had the sense she was not a woman to be crossed. Greaves gave a chuckle meant to lighten the room. Formidable, yes. I found her charming, if one knew how to make her laugh. She did not laugh often, but when she did. He trailed off under Poirot's steady gaze and shifted in his seat. Miss Weatherby spoke without hesitation. She was direct. I rather liked her, but she watched people. It could make you uneasy, as though she was sketching your soul, not your face. Did she ever speak of her affairs? Poirot asked. No, said Mrs. Rawlinson promptly. Her husband glanced at her, as if to gauge whether she had spoken too soon. She listened more than she talked. Except with Colonel Thurston, she added, turning her gaze toward him. The Colonel's brows drew together. We dined together twice, yes. I knew her late husband. Nothing more to it than that. Poirot inclined his head. And last evening, monsieur, where were you at, let us say, the hour of 10? In the lounge here, reading. Ask Bennett, he saw me. Poirot moved on, lightly, as though the answers were merely social pleasantries. He asked about the previous night's recital, which several had attended. Mrs. Latchford mentioned seeing Mrs. Burnley in the corridor at 9:30, just after she'd had her cocoa brought up. Miss Weatherby added that she had glimpsed her on the landing before retiring, but could not say the hour precisely. Then Poirot, in that deceptively casual manner, posed the question that shifted the air, and did anyone visit her room after that? There was a ripple of denials, each too quick. Poirot watched them as a cat watches leaves in the wind. Not the sound, but the pattern. Greaves glanced at the Colonel. The Colonel's gaze remained fixed on the fire. Miss Weatherby looked toward Mrs. Rawlinson, who met it calmly. Field, at the far window, pretended to study the sea. You see, Poirot continued, this morning, when the chambermaid entered, the bed told us something unusual, that our poor lady had not moved from one side all the night, and that the other remained as it had been. To some it might seem nothing. To me it says she awaited a guest, or that someone did join her, but with care not to disturb what would be seen. A silence followed. The sort of silence that is not emptiness, but pressure. Then Field shifted in his seat. You speak as though it must have been one of us. Mon cher, the Glendower is not so large, Poirot said with a small smile. The night hours are long, and the corridors are not patrolled as a fortress. But perhaps it was not one of you. It may have been a stranger. Yet strangers do not leave locked doors behind them. Mrs. Rawlinson's voice was low. Locked from the inside, you mean? Just so. Poirot's eyes lingered on her for a fraction longer than comfort allowed. And so, we must know who saw whom and when after 9 o'clock last night. Later, I will ask each of you in turn. For now, I thank you for your patience. Inspector Creel stepped forward. Mr. Poirot and I will speak to you individually. In the meantime, I ask that you remain in the public rooms or in your own apartments if you prefer, but do not leave the hotel. Poirot offered another small bow. We are in your debt for your cooperation. And remember, truth is like the tide. It will return, whether you will it or not. As the group began to disperse, Poirot's gaze followed them. Greaves lingered to adjust his cufflinks, perhaps to overhear. The Colonel strode out briskly, jaw set. Miss Weatherby walked alone, sketchbook clutched tightly, her head bent in thought. The Rawlinsons departed side by side, but without speaking to each other. Field stayed by the window until the last, as though reluctant to enter the corridor's narrower confines. When they were gone, Creel said quietly, Well, they're a mixed lot. Which one do you fancy for it? Poirot's mustache twitched almost imperceptibly. I do not yet fancy anyone, mon ami, but I have seen the glance that betrays unease, the silence that speaks, the quickness to answer that tells of rehearsal. Now, the real work begins. We must open the doors behind their eyes and see what is being kept there." And with that, Poirot turned toward the reception desk, already considering the order of his interviews, for in his mind the suspects were no longer merely guests at the Glendower. They were pieces on a chessboard, each with its own moves, and one with a checkmate hidden in reserve. Chapter 4. First Impressions. Quiet Corrections. When the last of the guests had withdrawn from the lounge, leaving the faint rattle of teacups and the whisper of the sea beyond the windows, Poirot and Inspector Creel took possession of a small writing table set discreetly in the corner. Mr. Bennet, the manager, hovered with the anxious briskness of a man brought up to keep discomfort behind the scenes. He set down a silver bell and promised to send in coffee, which Poirot accepted with a little nod and a soft "Merci, monsieur," that soothed the manager as if it had been a compress. "Before we begin the separate interviews," Creel said, "let us be clear on what we are about. The doctor will give his certificate if pressed. Heart failure, an elderly lady with no sign of violence. If we are to push for an inquest, we must be certain of our ground." Poirot's eyes were placid. "I'm certain of the ground, Inspector, but not yet of the path we will take across it. Still, listen, I tell you what the room has said to me, and what in turn I say to the room." He folded his hands. "First, the hypothesis of the heart. It does not please me. There is the small bruise at the base of the throat, in a narrow curve, more like the touch of a ribbon drawn at tension than the press of a collar. There is the clock, with its bruise and its theatrical stop at 3:12. Something that wished to create a time rather than to record one. There is the bed with its untouched left side, and the left pillow with a tiny crease as if something rested there a moment. Perhaps a careful hand, perhaps an object. There is the pressed violet under the lamp, newly bought, placed not inside a book, but displayed like a token. There is ash in the grate with the ghost of sealing wax, telling me that a letter with some formality, a seal, a tie, was burned after it had served its work, and there is the missing oval nook in the jewelry roll. Creel listened without interrupting. The habit of a practical man indulging a meticulous one. Very good, but even if we take it as murder, how, in a locked room? I'm not a novice, Mr. Poirot. I have seen strings, wedges, keys on threads. Here there is nothing. Poirot's moustache lifted a fraction. "Ah, but you have seen the strings that fool policemen. This is the string that fools the eye. We will not force it. The method is a shadow. It will step into the light when the person steps. For now, it is enough that someone wished us to believe in peace. A lady who lies without disturbance, a day without marks, a clock that says, 'See, I was there when she died.' You perceive? It is too polite." Creel scratched a faint line in his notebook. "And the motive?" "Motives are like hats," Poirot said serenely. "In a place where people come to rest, one finds many, a debt to be called in with embarrassment, a letter one wishes to recover, a reputation with a loose thread, a romance that must be encouraged or stopped. We will have them, do not fear." Coffee arrived. Poirot, who never neglected the small comforts that made contemplation easier for the little grey cells, took a measured sip, then set the cup down at a precise angle. "Now," he continued, "let us talk of the persons. First, Colonel Thurston. He is the soldier who has retired but not stood down. His chin says discipline, his boots say habit, his eyes say calculation. He dined with the lady twice, and he knew her husband. That is the overt fact. The covert one is that when Mrs. Rawlinson named him in the lounge, he did not look surprised to be named. He looked displeased to be named by her." Creel nodded. "There's been frost between those two since they arrived. He looks down his nose at the modern sort of marriage." "Perhaps," Poirot allowed. "But the Colonel's distaste is not merely moral. It has a flavor more personal. As for the lady, Mrs. Rawlinson, she observes, she is the sort who takes the temperature of a room by the degree of other people's smiles. She will not embroider, but she will withhold if it suits her. The husband, Mr. Rawlinson, has that ease which is very often a cover for unease. His hand went to his cuff when the hour 3 was spoken in the lounge. Remember that. Creel wrote cuff 3 o'clock, with a dot of emphasis. And Greaves? Mr. Lionel Greaves, Poirot said, has the manner of a man who wants to be liked by everyone and believes this is accomplished by talking. He's dangerous only in accidents, unless his debts are large. Even then, he would try charm before violence. He watched the Colonel. Either he owes him or he fears him. Miss Weatherby? A romantic who disciplines herself by work, Poirot said with warmth. She will sketch her fear rather than speak it. She's honest with herself in art, not always in life. She looked at Mrs. Rawlinson as one looks at a rival, though for what prize we do not yet know. Her eyes, when we spoke of the bed, went to the floorboards. She knows something about movement, about sounds in the night. And Mrs. Latchford? A kind heart and a nervous conscience, Poirot murmured. She will tell the truth after apologizing to it first. She knew Mrs. Burnley in London society. She also knows how a story grows at luncheon. In such soil, the little seeds of scandal sprout quickly. We must ask her to show us what was planted 3 years ago. Creel glanced toward the windows, where the sea lay slate blue. And our writer, Mr. Field? Poirot's fingers touched the rim of his cup. He sat far from the group to watch without being watched, the habit of the observer, and yet he is also the smuggler by temperament, smuggling himself out of obligations with a smile. He will have listened in the corridors. He will have walked when others slept. He is not the murderer because he writes. He is a person of interest because he walks. Creel chuckled softly, despite himself. You make a museum of types. Mais non, Poirot returned with a quick little lift of the hand. Types are the first sketch. People are the finished portrait. Now, one more person. Dr. Forland, a careful man, perhaps a little cautious with his reputations. He dislikes to be wrong in public. When one tells him his throat bruise is the edge of a ribbon, he will say, possible, and then, in his head, will say, annoying. We must keep him on our side, not by flattery, but by demonstrating that we too are careful. Creel shut his notebook. Very well. We begin with alibis. With movements, Poirot corrected. Alibi is a big drum, bang, bang, and everyone hears it. I prefer the violin. A note here, a whisper there. Where were they after 9? Who spoke with whom on the landing? Who requested hot water at 2? Who asked that a letter be posted at once, if you please? The staff will know. Mr. Bennet, if you would be so amiable as to send us Mr. Riggs, the night porter, and the junior clerk. Hargreaves, is it not? And the pantry maid who clears the trays in the morning. Bennet departed, and within minutes the door opened to admit Riggs, square-shouldered and solemn, his cap in his hands. Hargreaves came behind him, a thin, eager youth with ink upon his fingers. Poirot greeted them as equals in the enterprise, which melted their stiffness as surely as the sun does frost. Mr. Riggs, Poirot began, we are not the ogres, you understand. We simply wish to make a map of the night. You were at the desk until 2? Yes, sir. Then Hargreaves relieved me. Between 9 and 2, who was about? Riggs recited with the steadiness of a man proud of his recollection. Colonel Thurston came down at 10 to send a cable. He said it was to his banker. I put it through. Mr. Greaves was in and out of the card room with 2 gentlemen from the town, left at 11:30. Miss Weatherby asked for hot water for tea at 11:15. I sent it up. Mr. Field returned from a walk at 11:30. Wet shoes, sir, so he went out despite the mist. The Rawlinsons went up before 10 and did not come down again. And Mrs. Burnley? Poirot asked. I did not see her after 9, sir. Riggs hesitated. But I heard, well, that is, Hargreaves. Hargreaves coloured. At about 3, sir, he burst out. I heard a sound on the second-floor landing, a little clink. I went to look, but it was quiet then. I thought it might be a guest turning a key. One hears them. Then I saw a shadow move away along the corridor. I couldn't swear to who. It was just dark, sir." "Which way did it move?" "Toward the back stairs," Hargreaves said, more certain. "Not toward the main. Light under a door, only a line of it as if someone had put a scarf or something at the bottom, but that could have been earlier." "Which door?" Creel asked. "Mrs. Burnley's," Hargreaves whispered, miserable at having to say it. Poirot's face did not change. "And the back stairs, where do they lead?" "Service corridor, sir," Riggs answered. "Out by the little side door, but that's kept bolted at night." "Bolted by whom?" "Me, sir?" "At midnight." "Very good," said Poirot. "You have been of the greatest assistance. One final thing. Did anyone ask you to post a letter at once?" Riggs frowned, then brightened. "Ah, Colonel Thurston gave me a note with his cable. Said to post it if the pillar box collection had not gone. It had, so I put it for the morning. And Mr. Field left a note for the post at 11:45. "Urgent," he said. "But we treat them all the same after 11. When they were gone, Creel let out a breath. "There we are. Movements. Sounds. A shadow at 3. I'll put a man on that side door to look for scuffs." Poirot rose. "And I will put a man on the psychology," he said with the smallest of smiles. "Come, let us begin with the Colonel. We will speak of cables and of bankers. Then with Miss Weatherby, of footsteps heard through floors. And last, with Mr. Field, of why the sea mist is so charming at 11:30. By the time we have finished, the natural death will be uncomfortable as a shoe on the wrong foot." He paused at the threshold, his eyes returning briefly to the ordered chairs of the lounge. "Also," he added softly, "I would like to know who in this hotel owns a ribbon strong enough to leave a mark, yet pretty enough to be worn without notice." Creel tilted his head. "Why that?" "Because," said Poirot, "the bed tells me of expectancy, the clock tells me of theatre, and the throat tells me of control. Ribbons bind parcels, letters, memories, and sometimes in the hands of the determined people. Let us see who ties the neatest bow." And so they went to their first interview, the sea at the windows tapping a quiet metronome, while in Poirot's mind the little grey cells arranged themselves, not into conclusions, but into an elegant patience. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Begin, Colonel Thurston received Poirot and Inspector Creel in the reading room, where a stone mantel and 2 high-backed armchairs lent the air of a gentleman's club. The Colonel stood until they entered, and then sat at a right angle to the window so that the light struck his face from the side, carving the planes of cheek and brow into a soldier's topography, fortified, economical. He placed his hands, sun-browned and carefully tended one upon the other as upon a sword hilt laid across the knees. Poirot opened with courtesies. The Colonel replied with the brevities of a man who tolerates politeness as he tolerates drizzle. "You knew Mrs. Burnley's husband," Poirot said. "A professional acquaintance." "Acquaintance of long standing," the Colonel returned. "We were in Egypt together in the years of my service. I met Mrs. Burnley after her marriage. She was admired, a woman of poise, not to everyone's taste." His mouth flattened slightly. "Ship owners' circles are not my own." "And yet you dined with her, twice since your arrival," Poirot observed. "I did," said the Colonel. "Old loyalties." "Old loyalties are excellent," Poirot murmured. "They are, however, occasionally expensive. One sends a cable to one's banker at 10 o'clock at night, for example." The Colonel's eyes flicked to Creel. "Your porter remembers, I see." "Yes, it was a matter of subscription. I chair a small charity. Funds needed adjusting." "Very civic-minded," Creel said, not wholly without irony. "Would you object if we confirmed with your banker?" "You may do as you like," Thurston replied. "I have nothing to conceal." "Rien du tout?" Poirot sounded regretful. How sad, for concealment is often the polish on a dull day. Yet, since we are in the realm of candor, permit me a small curiosity. There is a trace of your name, Stan, impressed upon the blotter in Mrs. Burnley's room. Had she, perhaps, a letter from you? Or to you? A fractional pause. Then the Colonel said, "I wrote to her yesterday afternoon, by hand, on business concerning a mutual acquaintance." "Ah." Poirot folded the information as if it were a handkerchief. "You will be so amiable as to recall whether she answered." "I do not know," the Colonel said. "She thanked me in the lounge before dinner. Said we should speak again. We did not. You did not see her after 9. "No, nor at 3 in the morning." Poirot's tone was mild as milk. The Colonel's head came up, the tendons in his neck taut. "Certainly not." Poirot smiled pleasantly. "Bon, then a last detail. Do you happen to wear, monsieur, a watch on a ribbon?" The Colonel almost laughed. "On a ribbon? I'm not a debutante." He drew a heavy, old-fashioned officer's watch from his pocket. The chain sturdy, the case nicked with service. "Satisfied?" "Enchanted," said Poirot. "The solidity it reassures." He rose. "You will forgive our inquisitiveness. When a bed is too neat, one must wrinkle the covers with questions." They left him to his composure and sent for Miss June Weatherby. She arrived with the brisk step of a person intent on being useful to the truth. The sketchbook was still with her, as if she resisted being wholly separated from that second mind of pencil and page. "You are fond of walking late?" Poirot asked, after the simplest preliminaries. "Artists like the night for the arrangement of thought." "Sometimes," she admitted. "Last night I had tea at 11:15 and then went up. I drew until past midnight." "You heard nothing?" Creel asked. "Only the sea," she replied, then added with that honesty she had with herself, if not always with others. "And a footfall once, quick and light, along the corridor. Not the Colonel's, certainly. A lighter shoe. It was around," she frowned, "after midnight, before 1. I did not look out. I dislike to be seen listening." Poirot inclined his head. "And Mrs. Burnley, what did she seem to you in these few days?" "Like a person who came to do something and had not done it," Miss Weatherby said at once. "She was waiting, and she looked, this will sound foolish, she looked as though someone else's watch was ticking in her pocket." "Borrowed time." "Not foolish," Poirot said gently. "Very precise." "Did you ever see her wear a locket, an oval shape?" Miss Weatherby thought. "Yes. Morning of the second day. Silver, perhaps. A miniature portrait." She fingered it when she was thinking. "And last night?" "I don't recall it." "Ribbons?" Poirot asked lightly. "Silk in the hair, perhaps?" "Mrs. Burnley?" "No, but Mrs. Rawlinson has a dozen. Thin ones, pale colours. She ties them round her letters like sweets in a shop window." "Ah," Poirot said, not as surprise, but as the quiet entry of a note into his private score. "And you yourself, do you tie your work?" "I bind my folios with string," she said. "Not ribbon, it catches." "Merci," Poirot murmured. He let a silence bloom. Miss Weatherby, perhaps to fill it, glanced down at her sketchbook. Poirot's eyes touched it. "May I?" She hesitated, then offered it. Among studies of headlands and gulls lay a page of rapid strokes, the arc of a corridor, a door swung ajar, the suggestion of a shadow at the hinge. Below, in smaller strokes, a clock face without numbers, hands thrust to a little after 3. She coloured as Poirot saw it. "I draw what bothers me," she confessed. "The clock in the lounge stopped yesterday afternoon at 3:12. The porter wound it and it started again. This morning, another clock. Coincidence. But I do not like coincidences." "Nor I," said Poirot. He closed the book and returned it. You have told us something very useful, mademoiselle. You have told us that you notice. What have I noticed? That we shall discover together, Poirot said, and saw the flicker in her eyes that was equal parts relief and frustration. When she had gone, Creel exhaled. She heard a light step. The porter heard a shadow. A clock is dropped. A bed remains composed. A woman waits, and someone keeps her waiting. Or stages the waiting, Poirot corrected. Remember the tiny crease in the left pillow? That was not the weight of a head. It was the pause of a hand. They asked for Mr. Adrian Field. He came with a certain careful relaxation, as though he had rehearsed the act of being untroubled and now performed it well. He took the chair that had no wall at his back, one of those choices that parade as casual, and are not. You are a walker, monsieur, Poirot began. Last night, despite the mist? Despite it and because of it, Field replied. I like a town when the edges blur. It was 11:30 when I came in. Your porter keeps good notes. The sea left a souvenir on your shoes, Creel said. Where did you go? Along the quay, up to the lighthouse, down the harbour steps, and back by the beach, Field said readily. You'll find no conspirators' rendezvous in that. No, Poirot agreed, but perhaps you saw who did not like the mist. Did anyone pass you on the stairs, a guest anxious to return? No, Field said, and then, with the faintest smile that men give when they decide to confide a trivial truth to cover a larger one, added, I did see Colonel Thurston at the pillar box around 10:15, posting a note with care, and Mr. Greaves loitering in the card-room door at 11, looking to see whom he might persuade to a last hand. As for Mrs. Burnley, I did not see her after dinner. Yet you left a note for the post at 11:45, Creel observed. Urgent. Field's eyebrows lifted. You run a very well-informed house. It is my business, Creel said evenly. A commission, Field said. An editor who insists that Cornwall in the Fog is already late by the time one writes it. I left the note to confirm a wire. Poirot's eyes rested on him. You are observant, monsieur. You choose distance in rooms, and at windows you stand to the side, not in the center. It is the habit of the traveler who has learned that doorways are for passing, not for pausing. Tell me, why did you choose this hotel? Field's smile thinned. Because it was not the other one. And the other one. Too full of London faces, Field said. I like to meet new lies. He rose slightly, as if to suggest that his usefulness had reached its end. If I had visited Mrs. Burnley last night, and I did not, I would have told you so. I know a woman waiting when I see one. That one was waiting for a fight, not a friend. When he had gone, Creel muttered, That fellow has nerves strung like a piano. Yes, Poirot said, and he plays only the keys he chooses. He considered a moment. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Rawlinson, together. They are a duet, and duets reveal themselves by how they balance the melody. They came hand in hand, yet their fingers did not quite interlace. It was a hold that had been tidied for display. He was charming without being frank. She was frank without being charming. They sat together on the same settee but angled a degree apart. You retired before 10, Creel said, and did not leave your room again. That is correct, Mr. Rawlinson said. We read and talked. It was a quiet night. Quiet, Mrs. Rawlinson echoed, though a faint line appeared between her brows, as if the word did not fit as neatly in her mouth. You know Mrs. Burnley? Poirot asked. Met her here, Mr. Rawlinson said. Witty lady, a bit sharp. Mrs. Rawlinson added, She watched people. It can be a kindness if one wishes to be seen correctly. Or it can feel like having one's hem inspected for dust. Did she ever speak to you of a letter? Poirot asked lightly. Or of a ribbon? A ribbon? Mrs. Rawlinson blinked. Only that I tie mine too neatly. She said a woman who ties things so carefully will one day need a man who can cut knots. Mr. Rawlinson laughed, a fraction too loudly. A jest, surely. Surely, Poirot agreed and made no further pressure. And at 3 in the morning, you slept? Mrs. Rawlinson's gaze did a small, involuntary thing, flicked down and right, the mind's attempt to retrieve the somatic memory of a waking. I heard a noise, she said after a moment. A tiny clink. I thought perhaps a tray somewhere. I did not look. Merci, Poirot said. You have both been most obliging. When they had left, Creel sat back. Each gives us a piece. None fits together yet. They do not yet wish to fit, Poirot said softly. They prefer to remain in their separate boxes. Charity, sketching, walking, honeymooning. But we have already the pressure points, the Colonel and his cable, and a letter whose imprint lies on our blotter, Miss Weatherby and the step in the corridor, and the little clock in the lounge that also fancied 3:12. Mr. Field and his aversion to the other hotel, and a note at 11:45. The Rawlinsons, whose quiet does not agree with the clink. And the ribbon? Creel asked. The ribbon waits, Poirot said. It is patient. Ribbons are like that. They bide their time and then, with one quick movement, they cinch. He stood, smoothing a sleeve with fastidious fingers. Now, if you please, the kindly Mrs. Latchford. She will apologize to the truth until the truth blushes and steps forward in self-defense. After her, Mr. Greaves, who will overtalk until he says the one thing he meant not to say. He paused at the door and looked back as if at an invisible tableau. A neat bed, a pressed violet, a clock silenced by a drop. We move, Inspecteur, from the polite to the impolite. The little grey cells are thirsty. They will drink what is withheld. Chapter 6. A widow's apology, a gentleman's slippies. Euphemia Latchford entered the morning room with the hesitant step of someone arriving at an examination she had not studied for. She was neatly dressed in lavender again, the colour flattering her soft complexion, but her hands worried the clasp of her handbag as if it were a rosary. She took the edge of the chair offered by Poirot, perching rather than settling, and immediately said, I'm quite sure I can be of no help at all, Mr. Poirot. I hardly knew the poor lady, and I feel dreadfully that I cannot be more useful. Poirot's smile was the gentlest thing in the room. But, madame, you are already useful. Those who believe they have nothing to tell are often the best informants, because they have not rehearsed. Mrs. Latchford flushed, both pleased and nervous. Well, I did meet her some years ago at Mrs. Lansing's luncheon. I remember it perfectly because Mrs. Lansing had that dreadful cook who undercooked the lamb, and Mrs. Burnley was most gracious about it. Said it reminded her of a luncheon in Athens. Such tact, though she could be very direct if she liked. She did tell me that one should always stand when being introduced to a naval officer, even if one is in the middle of a syllabub. Poirot nodded as if this were the keystone of the case. You renewed the acquaintance here? Yes, yes. She seemed pleased to see me, though. Perhaps a little thinner, more drawn, as though she had been thinking too much. We had tea the afternoon before last, and she asked after several people in town. Oh, and she did ask if I ever saw Colonel Thurston. I said only at the occasional charity function. Did she give a reason for her interest? Creel asked. Mrs. Poe. Latchford shook her head, fingers still plucking at the clasp. No reason except, well, I shouldn't like to say, but perhaps I must. She said one ought never to mistake dignity for honour. I thought it a curious remark. Almost warning in tone. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Did she speak of her possessions? Jewellery, perhaps. She wore a small oval locket, silver with a little pattern of leaves. I remember because she caught it on the edge of her teacup and laughed. Said she had worn it for years. I didn't see it yesterday evening, though. I only glimpsed her in the corridor. At what hour? Just before 9. I was coming up from the lounge and she was going toward her room. She had a small parcel in her hand, tied with ribbon. Dark green. I remember because I thought it unusual for a lady to use anything but cream or gold for her packages. She tucked it under her arm when she saw me. Poirot's eyes gleamed for an instant. And after that, madame? Did you hear anything? Yes, now that you ask, I did hear something later. A sort of faint metallic tap, as though something small had been set down on a hard surface. But it was very late. Perhaps after 2. I assumed it was the staff clearing trays. She paused, her brow knitting, although there was no sound of footsteps before or after. Merci, madame, Poirot said warmly. You have been of the greatest assistance, though you will not believe it. He stood and gave her a small bow, which she returned with a flustered smile before being gently ushered out by Creel. The inspector arched a brow. That makes 2 who heard something metallic in the small hours. The Rawlinson woman at 3, Latchford at 2. Or one event, differently placed in memory, Poirot said. Perception of time is elastic, Inspector, especially when it is wrapped in sleep. They did not have to wait long for Mr. Lionel Greaves. He came in with the confident bustle of a man who believes his charm is as essential to a room as the furniture. His waistcoat was immaculate, his cravat an intricate fold of silk in a shade that hovered between plum and wine. My dear Mr. Poirot, Inspector, he began, I understand you are on a fact-finding mission, and I do so love to be of use. Though I must say, this is a dreadful business. Dreadful. Poor Mrs. Burnley. We had the most delightful chat about baccarat just the day before yesterday. She had a head for numbers, you know, most unusual for a lady. You knew her well? Poirot asked. Well enough to know she preferred champagne to claret, and that she disliked lilies. Said they smelt like a church in mourning. Oh, and she never wore pearls. Claimed they were bad luck unless one inherited them. Ah, Poirot said, as if filing this under an already well-populated category. And last evening? I was in the card room mostly. Colonel Thurston came in to send his cable, of course. We exchanged a few words. Later, I stepped out for a stroll about the lounge. Saw Miss Weatherby with her sketchbook, Mrs. Latchford reading. I lingered about in hopes of a rubber, but no one bit. Finally went up near midnight. You did not see Mrs. Burnley? Creel pressed. Not after dinner, no. Oh, except, yes, I passed her door just before going up. It was closed, but I heard her voice. Couldn't catch the words, but there was a sharper tone than I'd expect from her. I assumed she was on the telephone. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The hotel has no telephones in the rooms, monsieur? Only in the lobby. Greaves blinked, recalibrating. Ah. Well then, perhaps she was speaking to someone inside the room. I didn't hear a reply, mind you. Just her voice, brisk as if she were giving an instruction. Did you recognize any sound before or after? Greaves hesitated, the smallest pause. A faint rustle, maybe. I didn't think much of it. Poirot inclined his head. And you, monsieur, do you ever use ribbon? Greaves laughed. Good heavens, no. I send everything in boxes from the shop, far too clumsy for tying. They let him ramble on about his winnings in Monte Carlo until he, too, was dismissed. When the door closed behind him, Creel leaned forward. So, what do we have? A parcel in green ribbon, a missing locket, a visitor who leaves no steps, 2 metallic sounds in the night, and Greaves hearing her voice in a hotel room without a telephone. Oui, Poirot said softly. And we have something else. Did you note, Inspecteur, how Mr. Greaves told us he passed her door just before midnight? Yet Riggs swears he saw him in the card room at 11:45 and did not see him leave until after the hour struck. That is a small slip. When men talk too much, they forget to keep the strings taut. Creel tapped his pencil against his notebook. You think he went back down later? Perhaps, Poirot allowed. Or perhaps he moved the time to make his story feel safe. We will see. For now, the green ribbon joins the list. And note this. The locket is absent, the ribbon is green, the bruise is narrow. There is a thread here, Inspector. A thread that someone tried to burn, but which has left its ash for us to read. He rose, straightened his cuffs, and looked toward the corridor. Now we have spoken to them all as people. Next, we will speak to them as players in a scene. It is time for the first false lead to take its bow. Chapter 7. The first false lead. It is a favorite trick of fate. Poirot often thought that once one has resolved to proceed delicately, the world supplies a cymbal crash. By noon, the Glendower had one. It arrived disguised as routine. Mr. Bennet, with apologies, asked if Inspector Creel would be so good as to speak to a tradesman waiting below, a Mr. Quirk, proprietor of a small pawnbroker's shop facing the quay. He had, as he put it, a scruple on his conscience. Creel and Poirot received him in the manager's office. Mr. Quirk was pale and sandy, with the uneasy righteousness of the scrupulous man who fears he has been too slow in becoming so. He twisted his cap in his hands and came out with it at last. "This morning," he said, "a gentleman brought me a silver locket, oval with a wreath of leaves on the front. Good quality. I take no questions as a rule if the papers are in order, but—" He shot a glance at Poirot, found the little man's gaze patient, and hurried on. "Word of the death was about the town. You know how it is. And when I heard a widow had been found, well, I said to myself, Quirk, if there's a risk this thing was stolen, best you tell the police." "Describe the cellar," Creel said. Quirk wet his lips. "Gentleman of means, you'd say, but on the anxious side. Plumpish, good linen, a cravat, purple it looked. He was quick about it, asked cash. I gave a fair price. He left in a hurry." Poirot did not look at Creel, but the inspector's pencil made a decisive mark. "Mr. Bennet," he said evenly, "would you ask Mr. Lionel Greaves to join us?" Greaves arrived with his customary ripple of silken confidence, which faltered only when he saw Mr. Quirk. It was one of those falters that a trained ear hears at once, a note just off true. "What on earth is this?" he demanded, aiming for joviality and striking instead self-protection. "We will be brief," Creel said. "You visited Mr. Quirk's shop this morning and sold him a silver locket. Your description matches. So does your tie." Greaves blanched, then colored. "I will not be spoken to as if I did indeed transact a small matter, a locket that has been in my family for years. I wanted quick cash for a private purpose. There is nothing in that which concerns you." "The private purpose being cards?" Creel asked dryly. Greaves' chin came up. "Sir, my finances—" "Monsieur," Poirot cut in, gentle but implacable. "The locket, was it engraved within?" Greaves hesitated a fraction too long. "I did not examine the inside." "Then you will not object," said Creel, "to our accompanying Mr. Quirk and recovering the item for inspection." Greaves flung out a hand. "Buy it back if you like. I've no objection. Lord, what a fuss." His laugh came out brittle. "If this is about poor Mrs. Burnley, what has my morning business to do with her?" "Possibly nothing," Poirot said. "Possibly everything." He allowed the silence to deepen, and into it he dropped the smallest pebble. "You told us earlier you never saw Mrs. Burnley after dinner, yet you passed her door just before midnight and heard her voice in a room with no telephone. Your times do not agree with Mr. Riggs's recollection, which is usually excellent. Your description of the cellar in Mr. Quirk's shop agrees with you, and a locket of oval form is missing from the velvet roll in the ladies' room." "Coincidence," Greaves said hotly. "A damn coincidence. If you wish to search my room, search it. You will find no ladies' trinkets there." It was the invitation a policeman seldom refuses. With Bennet's sanction and Greaves's irritated consent, they went up. The chamber was fussy and florid, smelling faintly of cologne and cigars. Creel began with method. The top drawer of the dressing chest held a jumble of ties. Beneath them, in a brown paper sleeve, were 2 receipts stamped with a haberdasher's name. One was for gloves. The other, dated the previous afternoon, was for 1 yard grosgrain ribbon, evergreen number 2. Creel held it up. "You are fond of ribbon, Mr. Greaves?" "Of course not," Greaves snapped. "It was for a parcel. I dislike the hotel string. Cuts, ribbons tie with more. Finish." "And where is this ribbon now?" "In the waist, I should think." He gestured, impatient. Creel's constable, summoned to assist, sifted the bin with practiced hands. What emerged was the knot of a dark green ribbon, cut cleanly at both ends. It smelt faintly, implausibly, of violets. Bennett, hovering, said, "Our florist's scent adheres. Mr. Poirot, if one ties a spray with his ribbon, the aroma clings." "Ah," Poirot murmured. He lifted the knot by 2 fingers. "A bow, neat, exact. Monsieur Greaves, you tie as a shop girl ties. Quick loops, a small pin tuck to keep the tails equal. Not a man's clumsy reef." Greaves bristled. "What of it?" "Nothing," Poirot said, and meant it for the present. His eyes had shifted to the cuff of Greaves' jacket, a faint, pale smear like a whisper of powder. He said nothing yet. There were no trinkets, no letters, nothing that could be called damning save the ribbon's ghost and the haberdasher's receipt. Yet Creel's expression grew grimmer by degrees. "We will have the locket," he said. "Quirk, you'll accompany my man and fetch it." Within the hour, they sat again in the manager's office, the oval locket open upon a pad of blotting paper. Inside was a miniature portrait, the delicate watercolor face of a young man with a high brow and dark eyes, wearing the naval uniform of another decade. There was, too, a scrap of card, long-browned, bearing only a name in a woman's hand. Elias. No surname. Bennett leaned forward. "Elias Burnley." "Non," Poirot said softly. "Althea's husband was Adrian Burnley, the ship owner." He glanced at Colonel Thurston's card, which had been laid aside from the morning's cable, the initials CT neat at the corner. He looked back at the portrait. "No, this is a lover, or a brother, or a story of which we know none." Creel closed the locket and turned to Greaves. "Where did you get this?" Greaves spread his hands. "From my drawer this morning. I swear it. It was among old things. I meant to turn it into ready money. I had no notion whatsoever, that it belonged to anyone in this hotel." "You ask me to believe," Creel said evenly, "that by the purest coincidence you chose today to pawn a locket of identical form and pattern to the one missing from a woman found dead in a locked room 20 feet from your door after you lied about your movements and admitted to loitering outside her room at midnight." Greaves swayed between bluster and collapse, and chose bluster. "I have enemies in town who would love to see me in trouble. Anyone might plant a receipt or a ribbon." "Enough," Creel said. "You will remain at the hotel and be at my disposal." He turned aside to Poirot as if for the ritual blessing of agreement. "I think we have our man, Mr. Poirot. Debt, opportunity, a fencing of stolen goods, a ribbon to bind." Poirot's gaze remained on the locket. He turned it in his gloved fingers, studying the hinge. "I think," he said mildly, "we have a man. That is not the same thing as the man." Creel's jaw set. "You're not satisfied?" "Je ne suis jamais satisfait by the convenient," said Poirot. "Observe, if our poor lady was attacked with a ribbon from the front, what would our murderer risk? A struggle. Yet we have no sign of struggle, no torn lace, no upflung hand. The bed is the bed of a woman who awaited, who permitted, or of a tableau arranged with exquisite care. Monsieur Greaves is not exquisite, he is showy. He buys green ribbon not because he is subtle, but because the hotel string offends him." Creel gestured to the pawnbroker. "The locket." "Yes," Poirot said. "It is the strongest point, and yet, if this were the lady's, would Mr. Quirk not recall that it had, upon the ring, a hairline fracture at the hinge from long use? This hinge is firm. Also, see, within the locket's rim, a faint nick shaped like a crescent, as if a tool had once pried it open. That is the mark of a man who opens heirlooms to see if the gold is solid and then closes them again. Our missing locket, if it is missing, was worn by a woman who fingered it often. It would not bear a pawnbroker's bite. It would bear the polish of affection, and Mrs. Latchford's eye, which notices social minutiae with cruel exactness, would not mistake leaf for laurel if the pattern differed. Creel was not the sort to argue for argument's sake. He rubbed his temple. Even if this locket is not hers, he lies about the hour. He lingers at her door. He acquires ribbon. He smells of violets. Greaves gaped. I do not. You do, Poirot said absently. A little, on your cuff, but a cuff brushes many things. He set down the locket and looked at Greaves with the courtesy of a very small dagger. Monsieur, you said earlier that Mrs. Burnley disliked lilies, that she had told you so, and yet yesterday, in the lounge, you admired lilies on a card table arrangement and said they were her favorites. Which version is true? Greaves floundered. Did I? I may have been mistaken. Just so. Poirot turned to Creel. Proceed as you think right, but allow me one indulgence. Do not declare the case closed in your mind. There is a person in this house who ties knots with neatness, who measures out 10-minute appointments, who moves like a shadow at 3. M. Greaves is every kind of nuisance. He is not that precision. Creel's instincts warred visibly with his sense that an inspector must sometimes accept a gift. At last he said, Very well. He stays confined to the premises under watch. I will obtain a warrant to search his effects more thoroughly and make inquiries with Quirk about other recent pledges. Excellent, Poirot said. And while you open drawers, I will open people. They stepped back into the corridor. The sea muttered at the windows. Somewhere, on an upper landing, a maid's bucket clinked faintly against a rail. The exact sound, Poirot thought. That memory might place at 2 or at 3. He paused outside the Rawlinsons' door. In the carpet pile near the threshold, his eye found a tiny, flattened loop of pale thread. Ribbon's ghost, not green but cream, as if a bow had brushed the floor on passing. He did not pick it up. He looked instead along the corridor toward the back stairs, where Hargreaves had seen a shadow turn. First false lead, Poirot murmured to himself, and to the bed that still held the shape of a secret. Play your aria, mon ami Greaves. While you sing, the conductor will be listening for the instrument that is not in tune. Chapter 8. The Psychological Game. Poirot believed that truth, when coaxed, behaved like a shy animal. It came to the edge of the clearing if one neither lunged nor stared too hard. After the drama with Greaves and the ill-starred locket, he suggested something charmingly ordinary. Tea in the lounge at 4, with the windows open to the sea. Mr. Bennet approved at once. Ordinariness was the manager's creed. The silver was set, the petits fours arranged, the chrysanthemums adjusted with managerial zeal. It was a scene of civility, and in such scenes, masks loosen. The guests came much as they had before, but with the minute alterations of a day that has learned a new word. Murder. Colonel Thurston's jaw was firmer. Miss Weatherby's sketchbook looked like a shield. Mrs. Latchford's lace gloves were on when they had not been earlier. The Rawlinsons arrived precisely together, which is not always togetherness. Field took the same window seat, but moved it an inch farther from the light. Greaves, watched by a constable in plain clothes, wore injured innocence like a boutonniere. Poirot did not interrogate. He orchestrated. Colonel, he said pleasantly, you are good with knots, I think. The army teaches a man to tie what must not come undone. Will you be so good as to secure this little box? It has a mind to open. From his pocket he produced a small cardboard case, empty but for a folded napkin, and a length of ribbon cut from Mr. Bennet's store. He offered it to Thurston as though the colonel were being tried for his regimental life. The colonel obliged, hands competent and plain, a square knot, tight and unadorned, the tails equal by habit, not aesthetics. Parfait, Poirot murmured. One could drop it from a height. He set it aside, reached for another box, identical, and turned to Mrs. Rawlinson with a little bow. "Madame, you are known for your neatness. Will you indulge me?" A flicker crossed her face, but she smiled and took the ribbon. Her bow was quick, elegant. The loops lay like mirrored leaves, the tails snipped in a swallow's tail by a neat nail. She fastened a single tiny hitch beneath, invisible except to a man who loved symmetry. Poirot's eyes warmed. "Exquisite. You will forgive me. I am a connoisseur of order." He repeated the exercise, careless and social. To Miss Weatherby, who tied without flourish, a practical crossing meant to be untied and retied as one adds sketches. To Field, who surprised him by making a traveller's slipknot one-handed, efficient, undoable at a tug. To Mrs. Latchford, whose hands trembled and produced a grandmother's bow, generous and loose. Greaves demurred. "I've had enough of ribbon for one day, Mr. Poirot." And the constable's gaze cooled him into compliance. His knot was fussy and over-tightened, tails uneven, a shop window imitation. Nothing of it, to a casual eye, amounted to more than afternoon diversion. To Poirot, it was a little music, timbre, tempo, touch. He placed the boxes in a row along the mantel and let them be seen. People cannot help recognizing their own work. They steal glances. They compare. It tells a man who is vain, and a woman who is exacting, and a couple who wish to be seen as a couple. The Rawlinsons did not look at hers simultaneously. That, too, was a chord struck a hair off pitch. Tea circulated. Bennett, eager to repair the hotel's dignity, murmured apologies that contained all the syllables for no liability. Poirot drifted, a small planet drawing out tide lines. He stood with Mrs. Latchford only long enough to say, "You are graciousness itself, madame," and watched her relax as people do when absolved of significance. He asked Miss Weatherby whether the light was good at this hour for cliffs. "For faces," she said, and flushed, catching her own slick of honesty. He allowed a question to seed itself in each mind. "For the Colonel, do you find chrysanthemums too funereal? For Field, you walked last night. Will you walk again, even with the town so watchful? For the Rawlinsons, you are newly married. You must be excellent at waiting for one another." Each question had a harmless surface. Beneath, a prickle. People show you where the prickle lands. Greaves took the bait first, as men of nerves wrapped in vanity often do. "I protest," he declared to Creel in a voice calibrated to be overheard, "that I am being treated abominably. A locket that was always mine, a ribbon for a parcel. Why, half the ladies here drown their correspondence in the stuff. Mrs. Rawlinson's writing desk must look like a draper's counter." Mrs. Rawlinson smiled politely without showing teeth. "Better ribbon than string, Mr. Greaves. String leaves marks." She sipped her tea, keeping her eyes on the cup. It was a line intended to sail past. It caught instead on Colonel Thurston, who said too quickly, "String holds." The silence was the size of a handkerchief. Poirot folded it away. He moved to Field. "Monsieur," he said in a tone used for private conversation that is nevertheless public, "did you ever serve at sea?" Field made a small, amused face. "I? No. I get along with sailors better than with soldiers, perhaps, but I am unmartial." "So I supposed," Poirot said amiably. "Your hands are a traveller's, deft for tickets and pockets, not a rope man's. Yet your knot was very good. A man learns a slip knot when he expects to undo things before someone else does." "An editor," Field returned lightly. "Or a wife." His eyes slid almost imperceptibly toward the Rawlinsons, then away, a traveller's glance at a wrecked cart beside the road. Not morbid, merely mapping. Poirot let the room breathe, then, with the smallest clink of spoon to cup, struck his second note. "It is curious," he said to no one and everyone, "how clocks lie. In the lounge yesterday, our clock chose 3:12 as the moment to stop. Out of caprice, perhaps. This morning, a lady's travel clock chose the same moment. Out of theatre, perhaps. Eyes turned to him and then away, the way eyes do with a conjurer's patter. He watched for the ones that did not return to neutral. Mrs. Latchford blinked fast, merely bewildered. Greaves made a performance of indifference and failed at it. Field looked curious on principle. Miss Weatherby looked pleased to have her thought confirmed. The Colonel's gaze hardened a degree, as if a parade formation had been criticized by a civilian. Mrs. Rawlinson alone did something very small. Her left hand went to her throat and brushed the skin lightly, the way one touches a spot that is not sore but remembers being so. 3:12. Poirot repeated softly, and added as if he spoke to himself, 10 minutes. The words were as quiet as falling ash. The Colonel said, "What's that?" with too much briskness. Greaves, 10 minutes for what? With the false innocence of a man who measures only coins. Field, efficient, with a half smile. Miss Weatherby's pencil moved, unbidden, across an invisible page. Mrs. Latchford dabbed at her eyes, though they were not wet. Mrs. Rawlinson said nothing. She placed her cup with exactness on its saucer and began, with equal exactness, to retie the ribbon around the napkin at her place. It did not need tying. Poirot watched the compulsion express itself and be tamed. He made himself silly then, which is a weapon. He told a story, daft and charming, about a Parisian concierge who believed that violets, if pressed beneath a lamp, preserved luck. Absurd, eh? He finished, hands open. Luck prefers pockets. Luck prefers lockers, said Field reflexively. In stations. He heard himself and laughed. Forgive me. A joke for men who sleep badly in compartments. Luck prefers order, Mrs. Rawlinson said suddenly, and her husband smiled at her as if she had said something pat. One makes one's luck by keeping things in place, she added more softly. Poirot inclined his head. There is much to that, madame. To keep a thing in place is to decide whether it is allowed to move. If one invents a scene, a bed, a clock, a violet, one must trust that the audience will not look behind the curtain. Alas, audiences are naughty. They peek. He smiled as if at a child. The smile met the eyes of 3 people and slid off. It met Mrs. Rawlinson's and, for a hair's breadth, did not. Inspector Creel, who had learned to hear Poirot's music if not to read it, chimed in with a practical pebble. A small point for everyone's safety. We shall need any ribbons or cords you have. Packages, hat boxes, sewing kits, to be kept at the desk for the present. Nothing to alarm, merely tidy procedure. Greaves scoffed and then, under the constable's glance, swallowed the scoff. Mrs. Latchford promised to send her mending basket at once and looked relieved to have instructions. Miss Weatherby said she had string, not ribbon. The Colonel said he had no such fripperies. Field smiled and said he owned only the knot in his pocket handkerchief to remember trains. Mrs. Rawlinson lifted her eyes and said, "Of course," in the tone of a woman adding a line to a list already memorized. "Merci," Poirot said. "One further kindness. Each of you, when convenient, bring any letter you wrote last night to the desk so that we may confirm time of posting or delivery. It will save us the boredom of telephoning, particularly brief notes requesting meetings, the sort of thing that reads 10 minutes without salutation." There it was, set on the table like an extra spoon. If the writer were in the room, the muscles would betray them. The bouquet of tells a body offers under small heat. Field only looked interested. Miss Weatherby's eyes widened delightedly. She loved pattern, even when it hurt. The Colonel's face performed disdain. Greaves grew pink with the effort of disdain. Mrs. Latchford began to search her bag, though she had not been asked for anything immediate. Mrs. Rawlinson turned her head very slightly toward the windows, as if deciding whether the light had altered. Her husband spoke for them both. "We wrote nothing," he said smoothly. "We had no appointments." "I am charmed for you," Poirot said. "To have no appointments and yet be content. That is the secret of happiness. For the rest of us, the little engagements pursue." He let the gathering end on amiability. People cannot sustain wariness indefinitely under tea and sea air. As they drifted out, he repositioned the row of ribboned boxes so that Mrs. Rawlinson sat as the second from the end, visible from the corridor. She would pass it and not touch it if she wished to appear not to care. He would see whether will triumphed over habit. He stood talking to Bennet about trains while he watched her pass. She did not touch her bow. Her right hand fluttered near it, then decisively withdrew. Will, for now, had the better of habit. That, too, is a psychological profile. Creel joined him at the window. "Well," Poirot's moustache curled in contentment. "Ah, my friend, do you not feel it? The room has breathed differently since we spoke of 3:12 and of 10 minutes. We have one who cannot bear untidiness even in a joke. One who hates string because it leaves marks. One who ties exactly. One who ties to be seen tying. One who ties as a soldier and trusts knots more than people, and one who undoes quickly. The murder, if murder it is, sits somewhere among these verbs." "The Rawlinsons," Creel said, not committing, merely naming. "They are interesting," Poirot allowed. As is the Colonel's phrase, "string holds," as is Monsieur Field's glance at wreckage, as is Monsieur Grieves's eagerness to declare himself persecuted rather than merely questioned. "Do not arrest anyone today, mon ami. We will let them choose their next move when the board is quiet." He turned from the window with that small inward tightening that precedes a precise act. "Now, we go to the writing room. There is a telephone there, the only one the guests may use. I would like to see yesterday's message sheet and the stub of the pencil and the blotter that sat there while certain people spoke 10 minutes too long." The sea, beyond the glass, lifted and lay down again, a measured breath. Poirot felt in the room not the solution, but the first tug of the thread that would lead to it. Somewhere, in that small list of tying and untying, was a person whose weakness was not violence but control. The desire to arrange, to time, to smooth the bed and set the clock and press the violet, and to trust that the world would not see the crease left by a hand, resting where no head had lain. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The hotel's writing room had the hush of a chapel kept for private prayers. Green baize on the table, a rack of notepaper with the Glendower crest, a heavy telephone on its little stand with the rate card tucked beneath the earpiece. Mr. Bennet produced, with pride, all the apparatus that lends dignity to messages. The bell push, the pigeonholes behind the desk, the duplicate pads on which the night staff copied outgoing calls. Poirot, who loved order when it told him the truth and distrusted it when it was performed, stepped into the room as if entering a witness box. "Your message book, if you please," he said. "For yesterday afternoon and last night." Bennet laid it down. A ledger of neat columns in Hargreaves' painstaking hand. Room number, time, number dialed or person requested, and the word connected or no answer. Poirot's finger passed lightly. At 9:18, room 12, Miss Weatherby. Hot water. Riggs had already said as much. At 9:35, room 7, Colonel Thurston. Cable office. At 10:06, room 3, Rawlinson's. London Exchange, Belgravia, 7392, connected. At 11:42, Mr. Field, note left for the Morning Post. At 1:05, nothing. At 2:49, nothing. At 3:05, a line with no room number entered. The time written and then a blank, as if the pen had hovered and withdrawn. Poirot tapped the gap. Who wrote this? Bennet peered. Hargreaves. He is conscientious. I cannot say why he'd leave a blank. Because, Poirot said. He expected to fill it and then had a visitor. He turned the page over and examined the blotter that lay beneath. Hargreaves had been replacing them with care, but a sheet remained that had seen service. Poirot angled it to the window, coaxing the faint relief of letters. There. Long strokes, tidy, slightly right-leaning. He read only fragments. Be discreet. And lower down, the numbers 12. Below that, the smallest triangle-shaped imprint, as if the paper's lower edge had been nicked by a seal. He lifted the blotter and, with a gloved finger, touched the green baize where it had rested, a dusting no eye would have seen without wanting to. The brittle glint of wax crumbs, not red, but a melancholy violet grey, like the ash in Mrs. Burnley's grate. Violet wax, he murmured. Our Lady bought violets. Someone sealed a note with violet. Creel crouched beside him. You think a letter was written here after midnight? I think a letter was written here and sealed, Poirot said, whether before or after midnight. Let us discover. He lifted the telephone rate card. Under its corner, where a worried clerk might wedge things out of sight, lay a torn half of an envelope flap, the broken kiss of wax on one side, on the other an embossed A. Not the hotel's crest, a private monogram. He nodded once, very slightly. Our second ghost of a seal. Bennet, anxious to be useful, said quickly, We receive sometimes crested stationery from guests, Monsieur Poirot, for our message rack. Colonel Thurston sent a sheaf down the first day, his club's paper, and Mrs. Burnley had her own, A.B. in a plain border. Merci, said Poirot. And who in this house keeps sealing wax of the violet colour? Only the hotel's desk carries wax, sir, Bennet replied. Plain red, for our parcels to the post. Violet. No. He brightened. The stationer on 4 Street sells colours. Mrs. Rawlinson bought a stick on Tuesday. Cream, I think, or pale green, for invitations she is writing. Poirot tucked that away without comment. He was already turning to the rack of pigeonholes. One bore a cardboard slip. Room 7, Colonel Thurston. And within, a cable reply in the concise language of bankers. Adjustment approved. Remit as discussed. Another, marked Room 3, Mr. and Mrs. Rawlinson, held a calling card from a local solicitor, Temple and James. Return call appreciated, penciled by Hargreaves. Solicitors, Creel said softly, on a honeymoon. Newlyweds also write wills, Poirot said, or settle accounts left open by former affections. He replaced the card and drew out, from the bottom pigeonhole, a folded note in Hargreaves' careful print. Mrs. Burnley, there is no answer to your call. Please ring again. The corner bore a faint bruise of violet grey. She telephoned, Creel asked. To whom? Bennet checked the ledger. No entry shows for her room. But sometimes a guest calls down and asks Hargreaves to place a call and ring them back when it is connected. He then writes a slip if the line does not answer. And at what time was this written? Hargreaves, fetched, stood very upright. After 2, sir. I was at the desk. The internal bell rang once. The upstairs call, the voice, very low, asked for a connection to Belgravia 7392. Poirot's eyes went to the ledger entry at 10:06 for room 3. That is the number the Rawlinsons called earlier in the evening. Yes, sir, Hargreaves said, flushing as if afraid of having made an inference. But when I rung through at 2, the London Exchange did not answer. I made the slip and sent it up with the dumb waiter. The night-maid sometimes takes such up on her rounds. Did she deliver it? Creel asked. Hargreaves swallowed. I found it this morning in the pigeonhole again, sir. Someone returned it without a mark. Poirot examined the paper. It wore, faint as a breath, the hint of perfume, the same not quite scent Elsie had called violet. She called the Rawlinsons' number, he said. "At 2. And at 3 our little travel clock pretends to die. Between those hours, someone wrote and sealed a note in this room with violet wax. Someone pried a locket once in a pawnbroker's past. Someone tied a ribbon and cut its tails in a swallow's tail." He replaced the slip as if it were a playing card returned to the deck. "Now we shall ask the house for its gossip." Bennet, to his credit, did not bridle. In English provincial hotels, gossip is a system. He fetched Mrs. Penn, who fetched the night-maid, who fetched with her a sheaf of innocuous trifles that, placed together, made a braid. The night-maid, Mimi, wide-eyed and stout of ankle, reported that between 2 and 3 she had been on the 2nd floor delivering hot water to room 9, a gentleman with a chest cold, and returning empty trays to the pantry. "I seen a slip in the lift cup, sir, but it jammed," she said. "So I carried it up and tucked it under the door like. I don't look to see whose hands it meets." "To which door?" Poirot asked gently. "The one with the violet smell," Mimi blurted, then clapped a hand to her mouth. "Beggin' pardon, sir. There's a lady as keeps scent. It catches along the carpet." "Room 5. "Mrs. Burnley's," Bennet confirmed. "And after?" "After, sir, I saw a shadow. Oh, I know I shouldn't say shadow. Sounds fairy tale. Someone stood by the writing room, just stood, like you do when you're thinking whether to write to someone or go to them instead. Then I heard a soft—" She frowned, seeking the word. "Kiss, sir, like wax kisses paper. And that little tap, same as in the morning room, something set down careful." "Thank you," Poirot said, and meant it. She had given him what he desired. Acts, not judgments. He sent her away comforted, and asked Mrs. Penn in a tone that made it seem a question about laundry, which rooms held their own supply of sealing wax. "Mrs. Rawlinson has her desk things," Mrs. Penn said promptly. "The Colonel uses only string. Mr. Field travels with little. Mr. Greaves buys from the stationer when he needs. Miss Weatherby uses glue for her sketchbooks. Mrs. Abaia. Latchford uses whatever we provide. She's very obliging." She hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Burnley asked me on Tuesday if we kept wax in any color but red. I said no." "You are excellent," Poirot told her. He meant that too. Creel waited until the door closed. "So, our lady tried to call the number the Rawlinsons called earlier. She failed. Someone wrote and sealed a note. There is a solicitor looking for the Rawlinsons. The Colonel's banker has blessed adjustments. Our pawnbroker's locket is not our locket. Where do these threads meet?" "In old arrangements," Poirot said quietly. "Look." He returned to the ledger and ran a finger back 2 days. There. Temple and James. Message left for Mrs. Althea Burnley to call regarding instrument. The time was noon. The note was marked delivered. He tapped it. An instrument, that is the solicitor's word for a legal document. A will, a codicil, a deed. Creel's face changed by degrees. If she came here to execute a change, if someone wished that prevented or expedited, Poirot said. "Remember Mrs. Latchford's luncheon, never to mistake dignity for honor. The Colonel's corrections of funds, the Rawlinsons' number at 10, the same number sought at 2. I ask myself, before she married the ship owner, who was Althea? What promise did she write? What portrait did she carry? Elias is in a uniform, perhaps a brother, perhaps a lover. If a will is being adjusted, who benefits from the old shape, who from the new?" He moved to the window and looked down at the crescent of beach. In the wet sand, 3 sets of prints converged and drifted apart like a diagram, a soldier's square tread, a woman's neat ovals, a lighter man's zigzag. He did not need their names to know their habits. "Hidden connections," he said, half to himself. "The Rawlinsons and a London solicitor, the Colonel and a banker, Our Lady and a violet seal. And another, Miss Weatherby and Colonel Thurston. She drew, without knowing she'd seen it, a clock at 3:12 before we spoke it. She hears the house." Creel, more earthbound, said, "We can ask Temple and James for the nature of their business." "You can," Poirot agreed. "And do. Meanwhile, I will ask a florist why violets leave their perfume on ribbon, and whether he sold yesterday both violets and a stick of wax to the same careful hand." He turned back to the table and, with a small sound of satisfaction, plucked from beneath the telephone a sliver of something almost invisible. A hair, pale and fine, caught in the baize by the static of the handset. He held it against his glove. Fair, almost colorless. "Madame Rawlinson ties with precision," he said softly. "She also hairs with precision." He set the filament down, as one might return a violin string to its case. "It proves nothing, yet it sings." "Where does it leave us?" Creel asked. "With patience," said Poirot, "and with one more visit. To the back stairs and the side door. If, at 3, a shadow turned there, and if no bolt was drawn, then either Riggs forgot, or someone possesses a key that is not supposed to exist. A master passes under many hands in a hotel. Let us see whose hand it fits." As they stepped into the corridor, a maid passed bearing a heap of mending baskets toward the desk, obeying Creel's tidy procedure. On top of Mrs. Rawlinson's, like a quiet signature, lay a coil of pale ribbon, cream as new bone, cut in tails that had been snipped at a perfect angle. Poirot did not pause. He had no need. The little grey cells had found the rhythm of a new dance, and it was the dance of documents and of time, of 10 minutes promised and a clock that consented to play its part. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. The back stairs had none of the hotel's theatrical polish. They smelt of soap and coal and the quiet labor of hands that remained invisible. Poirot descended with Inspector Creel behind him, Riggs bringing up the rear with the proprietary gravity of a man whose dignity is pinned to a bolt. The side door, plain oak with a service glass above, ended the narrow flight like the full stop at the end of a sentence. "I bolt it at midnight," Riggs said. "As I have done every night since Mr. Bennet took the place, twice if there's weather, once at the spring latch, once at the deadbolt." Poirot bent to the iron. The bolt's face was burnished by years of thumbs. Its path into the strike plate was a black mouth with the lip polished at the lower edge and dull where no metal rubbed. He touched lightly the wood below. "You oil this, monsieur?" "Weekly," Riggs said, faintly affronted. "And last night?" "Thursday's my day," Riggs returned. "She was oiled." Poirot's forefinger came away faintly grey. "And yet, do you see, Inspector? A sheen where it should be matte, and here a kiss of graphite. Soft pencil, rubbed along the tongue." Creel narrowed his eyes. "Show me." "Someone anxious not to squeal the iron," Poirot murmured. "It is a trick of burglars' guides and of careful persons who dislike the noise of bolts when others sleep." Riggs made a strangled sound. "I swear, sir." "You swear you bolted it," Poirot said gently. "But consider an alternative. One may bolt, yes, and one may also hold the bolt back with a card slid between tongue and plate before the door closes. Later, a hand from outside withdraws the card, and the bolt slides home with the smallest sigh. Or, if a key is held for the bottom lock, one may set the deadbolt after entering and depart by the same method." He straightened. "It is not magic. It is practice." Creel's jaw worked. "A card, from outside. There's no gap." "There is always a gap for the ingenious," Poirot replied. "And look, here." On the jamb, exactly at the height of the bolt, a dewdrop smear of something not quite color. Violet gray. He lifted it on a match tip. The ghost of wax. It was warmed by a finger that had handled a fresh seal. Riggs stared as if at sacrilege. Who could? "A person who hates string," Poirot said absently, and rose, dusting his hands. They examined the stair treads, the landing boards, old scuffs, new, nothing that would read as a signature to Creel's eye. Poirot's attention fixed on a single bristle caught in the grain near the last step. A pale hair again, almost colorless, just long enough to be persuasive. He left it. He had no need to pocket talismans. "We will speak to Hargreaves about the keys," Creel said as they climbed. "Who has the master for this door?" "Bennett," Riggs said, dismayed. "And me. The night maid carries a cupboard key. Not this." "Then someone borrowed," Poirot said. "Or someone did not need to borrow. Later we will count keys. For now, we will count habits." He proposed a small errand that was not small at all. A walk to 4th Street and the stationer. A visit to the florist who sold violets and scented ribbon to seaside sentiment. Creel, practical to the core, preferred to send a constable. Poirot, who preferred to weigh the tilt of a shopkeeper's head when he searched his memory, went in person, with Creel resignedly at his side. At Bramwell's stationery, they asked for sealing wax. The proprietor, a thin man whose spectacles sat like balance pans upon his nose, produced sticks arranged like a rainbow. "Violet?" he echoed when asked. "Yes, sir. 2 sticks yesterday afternoon, 1 violet, 1 cream, purchased with a writing knife and a packet of crested blanks. I remember because we do not often sell violet. It is unfashionable unless one is sentimental." "Who bought them?" Creel asked. The stationer spread his hands. "Gentleman's account. Temple and James solicitors sent a clerk earlier for cream, but the violet, cash sale. A lady, fair hair, well gloved. Spoke precisely. She had her own scissors. Snipped the twine from my parcel without asking so she might take the ribbon instead." "Her own scissors," Poirot repeated, mildly delighted. "How efficient. And she snipped the twine. How?" The man pantomimed the motion, turning his hand across the line of an invisible string in a way that was not the natural gesture of a right-hander. Poirot's eyes glinted. "Merci. You are exact." Across the quay, the florist remembered selling violets. 2 little posies, sir. 1 pressed into a book by a young lady, 1 in a glass. Sold to a gentleman. The florist had tied both with dark green ribbon from his own roll. "The lady asked if the scent stayed," he added. "I said only if pressed at once. She smiled and said, 'Luck prefers order.'" "A motto," Poirot murmured. "One cannot buy such, one plants it in childhood." He left the shop with his mind tidied as he liked it. Creel left with his notebook untidier, which he did not. When they returned, there was an envelope in the manager's pigeonholes from Temple and James in a crisp hand that said a clerk had not been entrusted with the words. Creel slit it at once. Re, Mrs. Althea Burnley. Proposed codicil to will. Meeting requested Thursday, adjourned at client's request to Friday. Papers prepared accordingly. Kindly advise whether appointment was kept. Beneath, in ink of a darker tone, added later. Note, query concerning legacy to E. Full name to be supplied by client at execution. Creel stared. A codicil and a legacy to E. Elias, the locket. If she meant to change her will here and someone did not wish it, or wished it but differently, Poirot said. Mark this, Inspector. A client who adjourns an appointment to the next day intends to do the work. She was forestalled? Who benefits by the old shape? Who by the new? Who knows the difference? Not Greaves, not Field. Perhaps the Colonel, perhaps our newlyweds. He let Creel compose the official inquiries to the firm, to the banker. Poirot required other paper. He asked Bennett for yesterday's lounge seating plan. Hotels kept such things in their heads, if not in their ledgers, and for the bill of Mrs. Burnley's cocoa. 9 o'clock every night, Bennett said. Except last night. 2 minutes later. Elsie dropped a tray and lost time. 2 minutes, Poirot murmured. And yet our travel clock will insist upon 3:12. It is a melodramatic little thing. He went to Mrs. Burnley's room alone. Creel would have accompanied him, but Poirot asked for 10 minutes without company and received them because even practical men have begun to trust a magician by the time the third scarf appears. The room had not altered. Only one learns to see it anew. He stood by the bed and examined the pillow once more. The tiny crease at the corner had almost faded. He traced its ghost with a fingertip in the air. He looked at the travel clock, turned it over, and did something no one else had done. He opened the back. The alarm hand, a sliver that hides beside the hour, was set not to 3:12, but a breath before that. 3:10. The spiculas of brass had been levered by a small tool. It bore a delicate nick, no more than an eyelash. He held it to the light and smiled, very slightly. 3:12 then had been theatre. 3:10 had been function. He checked the bell. It was disabled. A square of card had been slid between hammer and cup. The alarm had been set to ring, then silenced before it could. The clock had been dropped, or made to fall so that the hands leapt to the desired moment. He set it down precisely where it had been and did not tell Inspector Creel. Not yet. It was a clue that required solitude to ripen. He turned next to the water glass. No lipstick at the rim, true, but at the base, on the outside, a crescent of moisture had dried to a sugar grain film. A tincture, perhaps, brushed by fingers that had not drunk. He lifted the glass by its far edge, smelled. Faint beyond the water, something like bitter almonds diluted to the edge of imagination. And beneath that, the same not quite violet he had found on the blotter and the door. The glass was a prop, too, but a prop that had rehearsed. He crouched and looked under the bed. Dust spoke the language of movement to him. The right skirting board wore a crescent wiped clean by a knee once, twice. On the left, just at the center line where the untouched half began. The nap of the carpet showed the faint drag of what had been placed and removed with care. Weight distributed evenly, not a human weight, but the long weight of something rigid. A folded rug? A blanket roll? An ironing board? No, but a trunk strap stretched taut beneath the counterpane to hold the bedspread in exact position while a second hand smoothed it. He rose very thoughtfully. 10 minutes later he rejoined Creel, composed and amiable. The inspector had news of his own. Temple and James would dispatch a partner. The banker had telegraphed a bland assent. Riggs swore afresh to his bolt. "And you?" Creel asked. "You have seen something." "I have seen many small somethings," Poirot said. "Together they will make a big. For the present, one practical step. Discreetly ask Mrs. Rawlinson to provide a specimen of her ceiling, anything at all, and inquire, as if by routine, whether she or her husband possesses a left-handed pair of scissors. Do not press. Merely ask. Also, obtain from Miss Weatherby, if she will indulge you, the crumb tray from her palette knife tin. Painters cut ribbon and paper. They keep their leavings." Creel eyed him. Left-handed. Poirot's mustache made a pleased secret curve. A tiny geometry in a tail that has been snipped. When a right hand cuts and a left hand cuts, the swallow's tail does not fold the same way. It is the sort of difference that only a fastidious woman and a detective who polishes his shoes with the same pressure on both sides observes. "You think—" "I think nothing aloud," Poirot said gently. "We have entered the part of the dance where one listens for the breath, not the step. Tonight there will be a second attempt, at escape, at concealment, at persuasion. We will be there first." He took his hat, and for the first time that day, his expression was not courtly but grave. Someone in this house believes that control is innocence, that to arrange the bed is to make it harmless, that to set the clock is to own time, that to seal a letter is to keep a promise from escaping. Such a person always miscalculates by a minute or two. The human heart does not march like a regiment. 3:10 is not 3:12. It is enough for now that I know this. The rest. He spread his hands, the conjurer at the edge of the trick. The rest, mon ami, we shall allow to come to us. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. By the time evening settled over the Glendower, the air inside the hotel was as taut as a drawn wire. The day's small disturbances, whispered conferences in corridors, constables in plain clothes crossing the lounge, Mr. Bennet's tight-lipped politeness, had done their work. Every guest seemed to feel the weight of watching eyes, and more than one pair of eyes belonged to other guests. Poirot was pleased. He had arranged it so without ever issuing a decree. A remark here, a suggestion there, and now the suspects themselves monitored each other with a vigilance that would have done a prison warden credit. In such conditions, the careless word falls sooner or later. He sat, as he often did, at a table in the corner of the lounge, apparently absorbed in the hotel register. In truth, his gaze roved from one small scene to another. Colonel Thurston and Miss Weatherby were by the hearth, speaking low, their chairs angled in conspiratorial symmetry. Mr. Greaves stood at the card table with Field, but neither man touched the deck, their conversation consisting mostly of muttered exchanges interrupted by glances toward the Colonel. Mrs. Latchford busied herself with embroidery at a table by the window, but her needlework advanced no more than an inch every 10 minutes. Her eyes were on Mrs. Rawlinson, who sat apart with a letter in her lap, reading and rereading as if it might change between viewings. The Colonel's voice carried suddenly, "And I tell you, I will not be maligned." He rose, stiff-backed, and Miss Weatherby laid a hand quickly on his sleeve, murmuring something. He subsided, but the ripple had gone out across the room. Greaves smirked openly. Field, without looking away from the Colonel, remarked to no one in particular, "Some people cannot sit still when there's an audience." Mrs. Rawlinson's eyes flicked up, cold and precise. Better to be restless than loud. Her husband, lounging in the armchair beside her, chuckled as though at a private joke. It was exactly the moment Poirot had been waiting for. He rose, smoothing his waistcoat. "Mes amis," he said, his voice a mild bell in the charged air. "It is perhaps time for a little order. Come, we will speak together, not in corners. Inspector Creel and I will ask each of you some questions, nothing unpleasant, here in the open. Truth is shy, but it enjoys company." They gathered reluctantly, but no one dared refuse outright. Poirot seated them much as before, arranging the chairs as if for a salon rather than an inquest. This time, however, he placed certain people directly across from others. The Colonel opposite Mrs. Rawlinson, Greaves opposite Miss Weatherby, Field at an angle to both the Colonel and Mrs. Latchford. "We will begin," Poirot said pleasantly, "with a simple matter, the back stairs. They are for the convenience of the staff, yet someone used them after midnight on the night of Mrs. Burnley's death. Who here has reason to know that side door well?" Silence, and then Field said with a shrug, "I do. I have used them to avoid wet boots in the lobby." "No crime in that." "No crime," Poirot agreed. "And you, Colonel?" "I keep to the main stairs." Greaves laughed. "Main stairs for the main chance. Eh, Colonel?" The Colonel's face darkened. "Better than sneaking about like a card sharp." "Gentlemen," Poirot said with a touch of steel beneath the silk, "we are not here to discuss pastimes. We are here to learn whether anyone here might have entered or left without passing through the front desk. That, I assure you, is of interest to the police." Mrs. Rawlinson's voice came coolly. "If you're implying that any of us left the building in the middle of the night, Mr. Poirot, you might do better to ask the staff who holds the keys." "I have asked them," Poirot said softly. "The answer is, not quite complete. But let us pass to another subject. Sealing wax. We have established that violet wax was used to seal a letter in the writing room that night. Does anyone here admit to owning such?" Again a pause. Mrs. Latchford looked bewildered. Miss Weatherby shook her head. Greaves gave a flippant, "Not my colour." Field's mouth twisted. Mrs. Rawlinson did not answer at all. "Madame," Poirot prompted. "I own several sticks," she said finally, "in different colours. None violet." Her husband smiled faintly. "My wife is an orderly woman, Monsieur Poirot. She keeps her desk in perfect order, every letter filed, every scrap of ribbon in its place. If she owned violet wax, it would be in a stationery case. And it is not." Poirot inclined his head. "Then we shall be reassured when we look." That drew the first visible crack in Mrs. Rawlinson's composure, a fractional tightening at the jaw. Across from her, the Colonel's eyes narrowed. Miss Weatherby noticed it, and the pencil in her hand stilled mid-doodle. Poirot let the silence work a moment longer before continuing. "We will also be reassured, I think, when each of you provides us with any ribbon in your possession. You recall Inspector Creel's request this afternoon. A small precaution." Mrs. Latchford murmured that hers had been sent to the desk already. Miss Weatherby said she had none. Greaves gave a little shrug. "The green bit I had is gone," and avoided Creel's gaze. Field claimed to carry only string. The Colonel looked faintly insulted by the very notion. Mrs. Rawlinson said nothing, but her husband answered for her. "My wife's are in the mending basket, as you saw earlier. Pale cream. Harmless." Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, but the harmless things are often the most dangerous. Yes? A bit of silk, a bow tied neatly, a clock set to tell a story. They seem innocent until one asks why they are there at all." Mrs. Rawlinson's eyes met his then, and for a moment there was no coolness, only calculation. Poirot had the sense that she was measuring him as precisely as he measured her. He broke the look with an airy gesture. "Inspector Creel will collect the ribbons, the wax, the scissors, and we will continue to talk as friends until we find the little detail that does not fit." "Which is?" Field asked. Poirot's moustache curved. "Ah, monsieur, that is the joy of detail. It hides in plain sight until you know exactly where to look, and when you find it, all the rest begins to move of its own accord." The conversation fractured after that into guarded chatter, but the strain in the air had deepened. As the guests drifted away, Poirot caught the small exchanges, the Colonel murmuring something to Miss Weatherby that made her glance sharply toward the Rawlinsons. Greaves leaning into Field with an expression of sour satisfaction. Mrs. Latchford fussing with her bag as if eager to escape the room entirely. Creel joined Poirot by the window. "They're starting to snap at each other," he murmured. "Bon," Poirot said. "When they snap at each other, they show their teeth. And then, mon ami, we shall see which smile is for the stage and which is for the kill." And he thought, not without satisfaction, that the bed upstairs, the violet wax, and the 10-minute note were no longer solitary clues. They were threads pulling tighter around the same knot, and the knot was beginning to strain. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. At 9:30, when the lounge had thinned to murmurs and the chrysanthemums had begun to look self-conscious under the lamps, Poirot asked Inspector Creel, very softly, to invite Mrs. Rawlinson to the writing-room. The request went through Mr. Bennet, who conveyed it with the deferential firmness of a butler presenting a summons as a courtesy. Mr. Rawlinson made to accompany his wife. Poirot, with an apology as light as talc, asked that he remain in the lounge, for but 10 minutes, no more. The phrase settled like a coin in a fountain. The writing-room was exactly as Poirot desired. Baize, the heavy telephone, the rack of monogrammed paper, the ledger closed but present, a single chair drawn out from the table as though waiting for a pupil. Creel stood slightly behind and to the side, hands in pockets, not an adversary, but an atmosphere. Mrs. Rawlinson entered with the air of a woman who had calculated her poise in advance and was content to find it sufficient. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. The coolness was there, the calculation too. She had powdered the tiniest shine from her brow, and the line of her mouth was exact. "Mais oui," Poirot said, with a kindness that had weight in it. "I'm a man who adores order, madame. You, I think, also adore it. Such people do well together. Sit, if you please." He indicated the chair. She sat without grazing the table with her skirt. "I will ask you certain little things. Forgive me if they are foolish. It is my habit to put toys on the floor and see where a child steps." She gave a fractional smile. "I am not a child." "No," Poirot agreed. "You are a person who ties a bow so that it lies like mirrored leaves, who files letters under their proper names, who does not leave a saucer upon a cloth without the cup. Such a person can help me. I have, you see, a confusion." He placed upon the table a small cardboard box, unfastened, and a coil of pale cream ribbon, the twin of the coil that had sat atop her mending basket earlier. "This poor box. It opens when I wish it shut. Will you bind it for me as you bind your correspondence?" If there was irritation, it did not reach her eyes. She took the ribbon. Her hands moved with the tidy speed he had already catalogued. Loops, tails, the tiny invisible hitch beneath to keep the bow from creeping. He watched not the result, but the method, the angle of her wrist, the way the scissor blades, produced from her own little case, of course, bit the tails in a neat swallow's tail with the motion of a left hand cutting across a line drawn by the right. "Parfait," Poirot said, and set it on the table with the reverence he gave to small, perfect acts. "Now, another folly. Will you indulge me and seal this?" He slid forward a folded sheet. Not a letter, merely blank Glendower paper, and an envelope. From his pocket he produced the stick of violet wax purchased that afternoon at Bramwell's. He saw the flicker, the smallest tightening at the corner of her mouth, and added careless, "Alas, Bennet had only the red. A friend procured this from the town." She lit the taper without comment. The pool of wax spread precisely. She did not drip. The impression she used was her own, a neat steel die from her case with a small monogram that was not her initials. She saw where his eyes went and answered before he could ask. "My maiden seal," she said. "I prefer it to the new." She pressed. The little kiss formed, perfect, cool, and unbroken. No tremor, no smear. "Exquisite," Poirot murmured. "If ever I turn criminal, madame, I shall outsource my presentation to you. Now, some very little questions. You and your husband spoke to London last night at 10 o'clock. Belgravia, 7392. She inclined her head once. "We called a cousin. At 2 in the morning, Poirot went on. "Someone attempted the same number. There was no answer. A slip was written and returned." He touched the pigeonhole where that slip had lain. "Do you know why a lady might call your cousin after midnight?" Mrs. Rawlinson's lashes lowered, a shuddering that did not quite hide the activity behind. "I cannot even know that it was that number, Mr. Poirot." "Quite," he agreed agreeably. "Quite, and yet it is a curious symmetry. I collect curiosities like a child with stones." He shifted his hands behind his back, rocking once on his heels. "You were in bed by 10. You left your room no more that night." "We were in by 10, she said. "We slept." Poirot let the lie stand. A lie placed early is a lie one intends to protect. "And this," he said gently, "this violet wax. Do you own such a thing?" "As I told you, I own several sticks," she returned. "Cream, sardonyx brown, moss, not violet." "Bon," Poirot said. "I ask only because the writing-room last night wore the aroma of it, and a small crumb had edged itself under the rate card, like a shy guest." "But it is nothing." He paused, then put the toy on the floor. "One last little point, and then I free you. The clock in Mrs. Burnley's room, how precise it is, the little drama it enacted for us all. How amusing that it should choose to stop at 3:12, precisely when— 3:10, Mrs. Rawlinson said, quick and exact, and then the silence fell like a dropped veil. She heard herself say it. She heard the veil fall. In the beat that followed, she tried, as people of order do, to tidy the slip. I mean, what does it matter? 2 minutes. These things are approximate, are they not? In life entirely, said Poirot, very gentle now. In theatre, never. Theatre chooses, and then it insists. He had not moved. He had not even looked at Creel. His voice did not harden. It softened. I have said to the inspector that the clock was melodramatic. It is true, but only one person here, besides myself, could know that its alarm had been set to 3:10, before it was silenced and the hands made to leap like a fish in a net. That person need not be a killer. That person must have handled the back, the little brass sliver, with a tool, snipped the card to still the bell. It is a finicky job. It asks for fingers that like finicky jobs. Her chin rose. You have no right— Ah, madame, Poirot said mournfully. I have only the right people give me when they prefer elegance to truth. He let that sit then to give her a path back, added almost cheerfully, but it is also possible that you saw the clock before others, that you went in when the maid was sent for hot water, that you, being neat, could not endure that the alarm should not lie perfectly at the mark, and so seeing it at 3:10, thought in your head, it should read 3:12, and— I did not go in, she said, with the reflex of control. Another veil, another soft thump to the floor. Poirot bowed his head as though in acceptance. He lifted the sealed envelope she had made and turned it to the light, admiring the clean impression. You cut the tails of your ribbon with a left hand, he said conversationally. It leaves the neatest little geometry. Most pleasing, and when the ribbon must be undone again, one tugs at the hidden hitch. It yields at once. So also with certain stories. Tug, and they yield where the knot is secret. Her hand had closed into itself upon the arm of the chair. When she spoke, the voice was intelligent and tired. Then ask me what you wish to ask, Mr. Poirot, and do it clearly. I dislike games. Mais non, Poirot said softly. You adore games. Your whole life is games of arrangement, but I will be clear. He set the envelope down. What passed between you and Mrs. Burnley yesterday? Why did she attempt to reach your number after 2? What paper did you fear she would sign this morning? She held their eyes for the count of 3. We had nothing to fear from Mrs. Burnley, she said. Nothing at all. We offered her— She stopped. A smaller mistake, but another. We, not I. Creel leaned forward at last. Offered her what, madame? Her gaze slid toward the door, calculation returning like a tide. A reconciliation, she said, which is more than you will get from me tonight. And then, contradicting her own statement that she disliked games, she smiled, a small, exact smile sufficient to end an interview, and rose. If you are quite finished, gentlemen, my husband will be wondering whether I have been arrested. Poirot stepped aside with a little bow that was courtesy and leash both. For the moment, madame, he said, you are free to rejoin him. One cannot keep an orderly woman away from her order. As she reached the threshold, he added, very lightly, Ah, and if you pass the side corridor, do not mind the bolt. It sometimes squeals. A little graphite cures it. She did not turn. Her back, under the silk, altered by a degree. Then she was gone. Creel exhaled. You had her, he said. For a moment, you had her. I had what I needed, Poirot replied. A person who corrects times cannot bear inaccuracy. She revealed the minute she tried to hide, and she does not act alone. It is always we. Then we pick up her husband, Creel asked. No, Poirot said gently. Not yet. If we lift the lid now, the souffle falls. There will be a second act, the desperate one. The neat person who has arranged a bed, a clock, a letter, such a person, when cornered, must arrange again. They will attempt to move a thing, to fetch a paper, to burn what is left. Our eyes must be there first. He moved to the table and, with the same fastidious care she had shown in sealing, placed her violet-kissed envelope beside the ledger. She was careful, he said, almost with admiration. But she invoked the wrong god. Control is not innocence. It is only choreography. The human heart steps when it will. He drew on his gloves. Come, Inspector. We go to the corridor by the back stairs. We wait. We do not startle the shy animal. We let it come to the edge of the clearing and show us which paw is blooded. Chapter 13. The Silent Corridor. The corridor by the back stairs was dim, a narrow vein running behind the lounge and the service wing. Its single light, shaded by a dull brass sconce, glowed low, casting the kind of shadow that swallowed the edges of things rather than sharpening them. The carpet was older here, its weave loosened, the pattern a faint ghost of leaves and vines, and the air held a faint smell of polish and the must of unvisited spaces. Poirot and Inspector Creel stood where the corridor bent, an angle that allowed a view of the side door leading to the writing room and, farther along, the service stairs that descended to the kitchen hall. From here, they could also watch the small passage branching toward the guest bedrooms. It was, Poirot had judged, the crossroads where necessity might drive a guilty mind. Creel, broad-shouldered in the dimness, kept his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the little square of carpet in front of the writing room. She won't come, he murmured, not with her husband sitting there like a sentry. She will, Poirot replied softly, his gaze steady on the far end of the corridor. Not because she wishes it, but because her nature commands it. The thing undone, it will itch. Even the most careful arrangement frays in time. A thread shows, and the neat person must snip it. A quiet creak came from beyond the bend, as if a door had been eased shut rather than allowed to latch. Poirot's head tilted, bird-like, listening. The sound was followed by the softest brush of fabric against the wall. Someone keeping close, avoiding the open center of the hallway. From the shadows emerged Mrs. Rawlinson. She was in a housecoat now, pale and unadorned, the sort one might slip into for a moment of supposed privacy. Her hair was loose at the neck, but not untidy, arranged even in this guise. She moved with careful, almost reluctant precision, her eyes darting once toward the service stairs, once toward the writing room door. In her right hand, she carried something slim and rectangular, a folded document or an envelope, shielded partially beneath the sleeve of her coat. Her left hand rested lightly at her waist, as though to steady herself against the air. Poirot did not move forward. He inclined his head toward Creel, the smallest nod, and the inspector shifted silently until the corridor behind Mrs. Rawlinson was blocked. The trap was not sprung yet, only laid. She reached the writing-room door and tried the handle. Poirot noticed her wince at the faint squeak of the latch and how swiftly she eased it open just enough to slip through. The door closed without a click, just a hush of wood on frame. Inside, the shadows of the writing room swallowed her, but the faint spill of light from the corridor caught the edge of the desk and the glint of a small brass key. Poirot stepped forward now, noiseless but inevitable, Creel following. They entered to find her standing by the pigeonholes, her back half turned, the document in her hand poised above the small fire already whispering in the grate. The smell of singed paper was just beginning to curl into the air. "Madame," Poirot said, his voice low but resonant, "a thing burned is a thing that cannot defend itself. Are you so certain that this paper would testify against you?" She froze, not in guilt, but in the stillness of a player caught between lines. Then, slowly, she lowered the paper, though her fingers remained closed over it. "I'm destroying nothing of yours, Monsieur Poirot. Nothing belonging to Mrs. Maipebata Burnley, either." Creel stepped to the side, his presence filling the doorway. Then perhaps you won't mind showing us what it is." For a heartbeat, she did not move. Then she turned, her eyes meeting Poirot's first, as though gauging which of the two men offered the lesser danger. She extended the paper toward him. It was a letter, creased twice, its ink faded in places. The handwriting was fine, deliberate, and female. Poirot read the salutation, "My dearest Margaret," and the first few lines before folding it shut again. "This," he said, tapping the fold, "is not an ordinary note. It is a thread. Pull it, and perhaps the whole cloth of our little tragedy comes away in the hand. That, madame, is why you wish to burn it." Her lips tightened. "You know nothing of why I came here." Poirot stepped closer, his tone softening as it had in the earlier interview. "I know enough. You came because you thought the letter was still in the pigeonhole where she had placed it. When it was not, you searched the desk, and when you found it, then you thought of the fire. The ash would tell no tales, but I am here, and so are you, and the paper remains." She glanced toward Creel, then back to Poirot. "It is private. To destroy it is a kindness." "A kindness," Poirot echoed. "Or a protection?" He replaced the letter in his pocket. "No matter for now. What is important is that you risked discovery to come here. That means you feared it in another's hands. Perhaps your husband's." She drew herself up, her composure sliding back into place like a lid. "You ask too much, Monsieur Poirot, and you assume more than you can prove." Poirot gave a small bow. "Perhaps, but I observe exactly what I need, and now, if you please, we will walk together back to the lounge. The inspector and I will keep this letter for the present." As they stepped back into the corridor, the brass sconce cast their three shadows long against the wall, merging and separating as they moved. Behind them, the writing room stood open, its quiet betraying nothing of the exchange that had just taken place, except, perhaps, for the faint scent of smoke still lingering in the air. Poirot knew the night was not finished. A letter saved was not the end of the matter. It was the beginning of someone's desperation. And desperation, in his experience, was the surest prod toward revelation. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. They did not return at once to the lounge. Poirot, with a small apology to Inspector Creel, detoured to the manager's office and closed the door. Only then did he unfold the letter he had taken from Mrs. Rawlinson's hand. He did not read it greedily. He read as a man handles a skein that will not if pulled. "My dearest Margaret." So it began, in a firm, feminine hand whose regularity had not deserted it with age. A line about the sea air, a sentence of thanks for the précis you caused Temple and James to send. And then, more closely written, "We must be exact. Tomorrow will do. I wish to see your proofs and to put the matter of E's legacy beyond dispute. Bring the miniature if you have it still. I will bring the instrument. We shall keep the world out of it. 10 minutes will suffice for the signature." There was more, an admonition about discretion, a phrase that might have been tenderness and might have been severity. Althea Burnley did not confuse the two. And finally, a delay. "If you will not have it in my room, we will meet in the writing room, which is less observed after 2. I shall be awake." Poirot breathed out very softly and folded the paper again. He saw, as he always did at such moments, not words, but hands. Mrs. Burnley's setting down the travel clock and turning the finicky brass of the alarm to 3:10. Mrs. Rawlinson's, tidy and precise, trimming a ribbon tail with the left-handed nip he had already catalogued. A third hand, whose, pressing a violet seal into pliant wax in a room scented by chrysanthemums and the sea. He held the paper to the light. At the bottom, where a careful woman's pen had hesitated, lay the faintest oval shadow, the ghost of a pressed flower that had once lain between the sheet and its neighbor. A violet. Luck prefers order, and order, tonight, had preferred drama. Is it enough? Creel asked quietly. It is the key to a cupboard, not to the house, Poirot said, but it unlocks the word E. It is not a charity. It is not a club. It is a person, Elias. He tapped the folded letter. Our miniature, our naval face, our name written long ago on a scrap of card and tucked under paint. The codicil would have put a legacy beyond dispute, if the identity were proved, if the miniature were produced. Mrs. Rawlinson brought her proofs to the town. Mrs. Burnley, cautious, asked to see the miniature. The little appointment of 10 minutes. And then, someone chose that there should be no signature at all. Do you think the Rawlinsons wanted the legacy for themselves? Creel asked, or to prevent it going to a rival? Poirot's eyes warmed with that private amusement that is not humor but the contentment of pattern. You ask me if a woman who abhors string because it leaves marks is tempted by the thought of a life without threads that chafe. Perhaps. Or perhaps she believes, as neat minds do, that she is the proper steward of what the world would spend foolishly. Control is a virtue until it is a god. He set the letter on Bennett's blotter, aligning its corner with the corner of the pad. We will not show this yet. We will let it draw. In the lounge, the scene had shifted by half-tones. Mr. Rawlinson now stood, hands in his pockets, conversing with Field in the manner of men who smile with their mouths and not their eyes. The colonel, armored in rectitude, had chosen a chair directly opposite the corridor by which Mrs. Rawlinson must return. Miss Weatherby had turned her sketchbook to a clean page and made a single vertical line upon it, as if to divide a face. Mrs. Latchford, poor soul, pricked her thumb and bled on her embroidery. Greaves, under the constable's gaze, managed to look both martyred and oily at once. Poirot conducted Mrs. Rawlinson back with gallantry. She thanked him with politesse and took her seat beside her husband. He did not ask. She did not volunteer. If there was a flare between their glances, it was the kind of heat that makes no light. What now? Creel murmured. Now we do nothing, Poirot said serenely. We ask Temple and James to breakfast. We say to the house that we will hold a little reunion tomorrow at 11, when the law joins us. And tonight, he looked toward the stair. We sleep, and we do not. There will be footsteps. A person who prefers arrangements will attempt to adjust what remains. He told Bennett very quietly to double the watch on the side door and to give Hargreaves a task he would be proud to perform. Keep the writing room locked and the key at his belt. He asked Riggs to note, in that slate of his, the exact minute at which the lamps were turned low and the bolt drawn. Precision gives courage, he told them, and saw their backs straighten. Then, because one must always give something ordinary for people to hold while their minds stumble in extraordinary rooms, he asked for cocoa to be served, as it had been served to Mrs. Burnley at 9. They drank it under the chrysanthemum's embarrassed stare. Miss Weatherby laid down her pencil. The colonel discussed garrison duty in Cairo with a man who had never seen the Nile. Greaves dared to lose a shilling at patience and made a comedy of his generosity. The Rawlinsons read. Field watched. Mrs. Latchford dabbed a stitch that was beyond saving. When the clock in the lounge, a creature with less taste for theatre than its cousin upstairs, struck 10, Creel took a turn through the corridors and placed a man discreetly on each landing. Poirot, who understood the odd inward vanity of an English inspector who will not be seen to fuss and yet fusses exquisitely, praised him without saying so. It is well, he observed to no one. When a bolt answers to two minds, they let the hotel fall into its noises. Water in the pipes, a last laugh from a kitchen maid, the tick that belongs to any place where people have agreed to pretend that time can be measured in the same way for all. Poirot removed his shoes and polished them with the same pressure on both sides, a ritual that was a thought in another form, and then, at 2:30, returned to the upstairs corridor where Creel already stood. No words now. 2 men and a dim light and a carpet whose pattern was the memory of leaves. At 10 minutes to 3, the hotel was a held breath. At 3, a door opened, the hush kind that neither announces nor apologizes. At 3:06, a shadow detached itself from the Rawlinsons' side of the corridor and moved along the wall, hand for balance, skirt whispering. The same pale house coat, the same precision in stealth as in everything. She went not to the writing room, Hargreaves had locked it and cherished the key, but to the landing above the back stairs, where a small cupboard held mops and towels and, if one were ingenious, the things one preferred not to carry back and forth past the desk. Poirot touched Creel's arm. They did not pounce. They waited until the cupboard door breathed, until the slip of a packet met the shelf with that tiny tap they had heard named 3 times now. Then he stepped. "Madame," he said, and the word in that small, stale-smelling space was almost kind. "You will save us trouble if you do not put it behind the pails." For the second time that night she froze. For the second time she did not crumple. She turned with the packet in her hand. Brown paper, cream ribbon, a wax seal so perfect it might have been pressed in daylight. "You have no warrant," she said, her voice low. "I have patience," Poirot returned. "And you have what you meant to burn if you could not hide it. The miniature and the drafts from Temple and James that do not say what you wish them to say. The seal is your maiden die. The snip is your left hand. The knot is your little hidden hitch. And the hour is one chosen by a woman who knows that an inspector takes coffee at 2 and circles back at 3. He glanced almost tenderly at the packet. You could not bear to leave it where it might be found by anyone but you. Creel took the parcel with a steady hand. The seal was unbroken. "We will open this in the morning with the solicitor present," he said. "For now, it stays with me." She looked at him, then at Poirot. For an instant, the control failed enough for something true to look out. Not malice, not even fear. Resentment. "You cannot imagine," she said, very quiet, "what it is to see order undone by people who have never had to make it." "On the contrary," Poirot answered, and the answer cost him nothing because it was true. "I live by order, but I do not mistake it for mercy." She moved past them without a word and went down the corridor as if along a ruler. They did not follow. It was not yet time to reduce a woman who would only restore herself before morning. Creel weighed the parcel. "That's it," he said, "with the letter, with the codicil, with the locket, whether it is the real one or a twin, we have it all." "We have enough," Poirot corrected, "which is not the same as all." He smiled to the empty corridor. "There is still a piece. Not in the Rawlinsons' tidy drawer, not in the Colonel's banking cable, not in Field's walk by the sea, not even in poor Greaves's vanity. It is a piece of sound, the tiny clink at 3. We will let it sound once more, tomorrow when we gather them." He turned the key in the cupboard and handed it to Creel. "At 11, he said, "we invite Temple and James, the banker's note, and all our little packages to attend the theatre. We will say to the bed, 'You have looked innocent long enough.' And to the clock, 'You may stop where you please.' And to those who love tidy endings, 'You shall have one, but not the one you rehearsed.'" As they parted for the scant remainder of the night, Poirot felt the case settle, not as a lid settles, but as a picture finds the nail that will hold it. The last wait would be the audience itself, their faces when he spoke 3 words. 10 minutes, madame. Then the final piece, already in his hand, would declare itself, and the pattern would click into place with the satisfying little clink of a key turned in a well-oiled lock. Chapter 15. The gathering at 11 morning came to the Seaview Hotel with a kind of pale, reluctant light that makes a man wonder whether the sun itself is keeping its distance from the house. Poirot rose earlier than usual, his routine unchanged but somehow quieter, as though he did not wish to disturb the pattern of the day before its true business began. Creel had been up since 6, walking the corridors like a sentry in peacetime. No enemy visible, but his vigilance no less exact. By 9:30, the lounge was a subdued stage. The guests appeared at intervals, their expressions carefully composed, but each betrayed by small tells. The Colonel's eyes darting to the clock as though afraid of being caught late for parade. Miss Weatherby pretending to sketch while glancing at the writing-room door, and Mrs. Latchford pricking herself again with her embroidery needle. The Rawlinsons were last to appear, side by side, Mrs. Rawlinson wearing the same immaculate precision in her attire as she had the night before, though her eyes were fixed on some internal calculation. Poirot, immaculately dressed in grey with a faint purple tie, moved through the room offering a polite word here, a nod there, never lingering. At 10 precisely, the solicitor from Temple and James arrived, Mr. Harcourt, a man with the air of a clockmaker, neat and deliberate, carrying a small leather case that he kept within arm's reach. Creel followed him in, holding the brown paper packet as though it might attempt escape. The atmosphere thickened in the minutes that followed. Even the clink of cups from the morning tea service seemed overly loud. Poirot took the center of the room, but he did not yet declare the purpose of the gathering. Instead, he engaged Harcourt in a brief, apparently casual discussion about the sea's effect on ink, the conversation meandering just enough to allow everyone to watch without feeling summoned. It was Poirot's way of letting curiosity do his work for him, each guest leaning ever so slightly closer, each glance betraying the itch to know. At 11:05, Bennet appeared from the reception desk, carrying a folded paper. He handed it to Poirot, who read it in silence, his expression unchanging. Then he looked up and addressed the room in his soft, deliberate tone. "Mesdames et messieurs, if you will indulge me, I propose that we conduct a small examination in the writing-room. It will be brief, perhaps even the 10 minutes our dear Mrs. Burnley once requested. But first, I will ask you all to be seated. Inspector Creel, you will keep the door." They moved reluctantly, arranging themselves in a half-circle of chairs. The writing-room's wide windows gave a cold view of the grey sea, and the scent of old paper and furniture polish mingled faintly with salt air. Poirot waited until the last chair scraped the floor before stepping forward to a small table upon which Creel laid the packet, the seal still unbroken. "Last night," Poirot began. "We retrieved this from a cupboard on the back landing. It contains, I believe, the miniature and certain papers brought here under the strictest intention of control. It is not in itself a crime to keep such things, but when those things are needed to prove identity in a matter of legacy, and when their absence might cause the loss of a fortune, then the matter becomes of interest to both the police and the law." He broke the seal with a deft twist of the fingers and unwrapped the paper. The miniature emerged first, its oval frame dull with age, the painted face within staring out with the distant authority of a naval officer long gone to his rest. Poirot held it so all could see, noting without comment how Mrs. Rawlinson's eyes did not waver. Next came several folded sheets, correspondence from Temple and James, bearing dates from 3 months past. He passed them to Harcourt, who examined each before nodding. "These are indeed our letters to Mrs. Rawlinson," he confirmed. "They request additional proof before the codicil in Mrs. Burnley's will could be executed." Poirot inclined his head. "And now, the codicil itself." He drew out a final document, thinner than the rest, its edges slightly frayed. Harcourt leaned forward, his brows lifting. "That," he said, "is genuine and unsigned." There was a ripple through the room, the kind of breath people take when they recognize the pivot upon which a case turns. The Colonel shifted in his seat. Greaves leaned forward with unseemly eagerness, and Miss Weatherby's pencil made an almost imperceptible mark in her sketchbook. Poirot laid the unsigned codicil flat on the table. Here is where Mrs. Burnley's plan faltered. She wished to see the miniature before signing. She set an hour, after 2, in the writing room when she believed it would be quiet, but before that meeting could take place, She was dead. The codicil remained unsigned, the legacy unclaimed, and the miniature vanished. Creel's voice, low but firm, cut into the hush. Until last night. Just so, Poirot agreed. And the letter we saw yesterday, the one from Mrs. Burnley to Mrs. Rawlinson, confirmed the arrangement. It also confirmed that the legacy was to pass not to Mrs. Rawlinson herself, but to a certain Elias. Harcourt's brows rose again. The seaman? Poirot nodded. A man whose face is here, in miniature, painted long before the war. Mrs. Burnley believed him lost, but he was found by Mrs. Rawlinson. Found, and perhaps brought to her attention in just such a way as to reopen the matter of the legacy. Only, order demanded proof. Order demanded control, and when events threatened to escape control, he let the sentence trail off, allowing the silence to speak. Mrs. Rawlinson sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on Poirot. If there was defiance in her expression, it was tempered by a calm that seemed almost unnatural. And so, Poirot continued, we are left with questions. Who else knew of this arrangement? Who feared its outcome enough to ensure the meeting would never take place? And, most important, who placed the travel clock by Mrs. Burnley's bed? Set not to wake her, but to mark the hour of her death. The words hung in the air like the final chime of a clock. No one spoke. Even the sea beyond the window seemed to hold its breath. Poirot looked to Creel. Inspector, I believe we are ready for the last step. We have the letters, the miniature, the codicil. We have the hour. All that remains is to fit the piece that will make the picture whole. And for that, he looked deliberately around the room, his gaze passing from face to face until it rested, very gently, on one in particular. We shall meet here again this afternoon, when the tide has turned. He gathered the papers, returning them to Harcourt's case, and replaced the miniature in its wrapping. The meeting, such as it was over. Yet no one moved at once. Each guest seemed reluctant to be the first to stand, as though the shifting of a single chair might cause the fragile balance of the moment to collapse. Poirot, satisfied, stepped aside. Mes amis, he said softly, until later. And with that, he left them to their thoughts, knowing those thoughts would do more in the next few hours than any interrogation could achieve. Chapter 16. The Reveal. They came at 11 as if drawn by weather, heavy with something about to break. The Glendowers' writing room had been cleared to its essentials. Mr. Bennet removed the ornamental bowl of chrysanthemums, funereal, Field had once called them, and placed 3 straight-backed chairs facing the sea. Inspector Creel stood by the door. Mr. Harcourt of Temple, and James set his leather case on the baize like a judge laying down a book of hours. The guests arrayed themselves with the unconscious choreography of habit. Colonel Thurston front and center as though inspecting a parade. Miss Weatherby at an angle, sketchbook shut like a closed eye. Mrs. Latchford near the edge, her embroidery forgotten in her lap. Greaves on the periphery, eager for the line that would let him step into innocence. Field at the window, not quite in the scene, not quite out of it. The Rawlinsons sat together with the careful distance of people who intend not to touch. Poirot did not mount a little platform or take a cane to tap the floor. He remained small and contained, the sea at his shoulder, his hands joined lightly as if in prayer. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, and the room's murmurs folded themselves away. We have, you and I, travelled together a little road. This morning we arrive at its end. You will forgive me if I speak at length. A good pattern deserves to be seen complete. He inclined his head to Creel. First, the facts that are not in dispute. Mrs. Althea Burnley died last night in her bed, the door of her room locked, the key within. There were no signs of a struggle. A small bruise lay at the base of the throat. The windows were fastened. The fire in the grate showed the ash of paper and the ghost of violet wax. On the right bedside table, a travel clock lay stopped at 3:12. On the dressing table, a jewelry roll contained one empty oval. The left half of the bed remained untouched. The left pillow bore the faint crease of something set there a moment. These things, they were our little soldiers. We add, Mrs. Burnley had asked our good Mr. Harcourt to prepare a codicil to her will. There was to be a legacy to one whose name begins with E. We have in our hands the miniature of an Elias, a naval officer, long ago beloved or blood. No matter which, the sentiment is the same. We have a letter written yesterday by Mrs. Burnley to a lady she addresses as my dearest Margaret, and we know Mrs. Rawlinson's Christian name is Margaret, asking for a meeting of 10 minutes in the writing room after 2, there to see proofs and the miniature before she would put her signature to the instrument. Voila. The arrangement. He let that sink into the carpet, into the sea. Across the half-circle, Mrs. Rawlinson's face was attentive and blank. Her husband watched a knot in the baize as if it contained a riddle more congenial than this one. Now, Poirot went on, we place beside these objects the little behaviors of human beings. Someone purchased violet sealing wax at Bramwell's. The shopkeeper remembers a fair-haired lady who cut his twine with her own scissors and took his ribbon instead. Someone in this house dislikes string because it leaves marks and ties ribbons with a perfection that includes a tiny hidden hitch. Someone set graphite on the side door bolt to quiet it and left the kiss of violet wax on the jamb, a door used after midnight. Someone, moreover, knows to a nicety the difference between 3:10 and 3:12. His eyes flicked not unkindly toward Mrs. Rawlinson, then away. Lastly, he said, we listen. At 2 or thereabouts, Hargreaves heard the upstairs bell. A low voice asked him to connect Belgravia 7392, the number the Rawlinsons had called earlier that evening. The exchange did not answer. The slip was written, perfumed faintly with violet, and returned. Between then and 3, the night maid heard a soft kiss, wax upon paper, and the small tap of something set down. At 3, a tiny metallic clink, and at 3:12, our melodramatic little clock declares a moment. Colonel Thurston stirred. Very pretty, but a locked door, unless you're about to tell us the murderer flew, Mr. Poirot. I prefer mechanics to metaphors. Mais certainement, said Poirot. We have mechanics. The lock to Mrs. Burnley's room is of a kind that will not admit the passkey if a key remains in the inside. When Mr. Bennet went to open this morning, he could not. He had to push the key out onto a card. Therefore, the key was in the inner side of the lock when we found her, yet the murderer was not in the room. How, then? Like so, after the deed, the door was locked from within and the key left in place. The murderer did not depart by that door. They had prepared a second path, the back stair and side door, whose bolt they had treated with graphite and whose latch they had learned to silence with a card. They slipped out by that way. Later, at 3, they returned not to enter, but to complete the theatre. In the writing room they sealed a note with violet wax. At the bed they dropped the travel clock from a careful inch, so that its untrustworthy heart leapt to the pre-selected time. The tiny clink that several of you heard was the sound of brass kissing wood. Then they went away by the quiet door again, leaving the inner key untouched. In the morning it was found exactly as they needed it to be, a tableau of privacy. A little movement went through the guests, a wave of unwilling admiration. Greaves made a small noise like a cork failing to pop. Miss Weatherby's hand lifted, then fell, as if she might applaud the completeness of the illusion, and then remembered the subject was death. Krell said in his level voice, "And the deed?" "The deed," Poirot said softly, "was not violent as we imagine violence. Mrs. Burnley invited it. She lay on the right side of the bed, as she was accustomed when another might occupy the left. She expected a visitor for 10 minutes. A person she trusted sat where no head lay. The tiny crease on the left pillow tells me it was a hand that rested there, not a skull. They spoke, They showed papers. They showed perhaps a miniature in its frame. When the moment came, the ribbon was ready, a pretty thing, cream and narrow, cut with a left-handed taste, and tied beneath the hair with a little hitch that keeps a bow from creeping. One draws it tight, just so, and the bruise it leaves is the narrow curve Dr. Forland could not love as a collar's work. The bell of the clock, set cunningly to 3:10, was blocked by a card. It could not betray the appointment. The bedspread, held taut by a strap beneath, kept the left side immaculate, while careful hands smoothed the right. The glass of water rehearsed the look of night. The violet pressed beneath the lamp made a small poem of it. Then the visitor slipped away by the back. It is ugly, this quietness, but it is true. He faced them fully. I tell you now who arranged this. It was you, Madame Rawlinson. There was no cry. Control has its last dignity. Mrs. Rawlinson's face seemed merely to accept the word as one accepts a heavy parcel. Her husband's lips parted. Mrs. Latchford made a sound and put a hand to her throat. The Colonel's monocle, though he had not worn one, might as well have dropped. I do not say you wished the lady dead in your heart, Poirot continued, inexorable and almost gentle. I say you wished the world arranged. You had found Elias, his claim or his child's. You had proofs to show, a codicil to secure. But Mrs. Burnley was cautious. She would see, she would sign, tomorrow, and tonight, eh bien, perhaps she told you something else. That the legacy should not pass through your hands, that she would not be managed, that the 10 minutes belonged to her, not to you. For a mind like yours, this is insupportable. Better no signature at all than a signature that deprives you of the conduct of the affair. You did not think you killed for money. You thought you killed for order. Mr. Rawlinson jerked to his feet. You will not speak to my wife like— Sit, monsieur, Creel said, and the iron in his voice rang. Poirot's eyes went to him a moment, then back to her. You had the violet wax. You corrected my theatre by saying 3:10. You tried to burn the letter that named your appointment. You hid the miniature and the drafts. You went twice by the back stairs. The graphite and the wax told me so. Your scissors cut the ribbon tails with a leftward bite that leaves a geometry Miss Weatherby would admire. And you know the little hitch I found in a bow in Mr. Greaves's bin is yours, because you cannot endure a bow that creeps. But, he lifted a finger. A last piece was in my hand, and waited only to be spoken. The sound at 3, the tiny metallic clink. It is the clock, yes, but also, in the dark, at the exact edge of a door. There is sometimes another clink, the kiss of a key against a strike plate when one tests a lock already locked. At 3:06, Hargreaves saw the light under Mrs. Burnley's door, thin to a line as if a scarf lay there. Who lays a scarf to stop light from showing when one opens a door from the corridor? A person who cannot allow light to spoil a picture. You, madame. For the first time, something in her face altered beyond will. A flash of fatigue, of scorn, for them, for herself. She turned to her husband. Edward, she said, say nothing. Then to Poirot, not pleading, not even defending, explaining as one explains a household rule to the impertinent. You imagine melodrama. There was none. She would have signed a foolish thing. I meant her only to be still, to accept a wiser arrangement. She was frailer than I thought. Her eyes did not ask mercy. They measured consequences. And if I had not tidied afterward, you would have blamed a thief, or that ridiculous man Greaves, you see? I spared you an error. Madame, Poirot said, and the sadness in him was not theatrical. You spared no one anything. Mr. Rawlinson took a step as if to come between her and the room. If you intend to arrest— Creel's hand rose and Mr. Rawlinson halted. We will do what the law intends. For the moment, you will both remain. Colonel Thurston made a harsh sound as if a dry branch had snapped. And the locked door? The rest of your conjuring. Poirot spread his hands. The rest is housekeeping, the strap beneath the counterpane, the card in the clock, the wax, the bolt with its graphite. The call to your Belgravia number, whether to summon help or to be heard later as an attempt. These are the implements of a mind that believes the world can be made to lie straight if only one irons long enough. But life, mon colonel, it puckers. One cannot smooth out death. Silence took the room in its hand. Outside, the sea lifted and fell unastonished. Miss Weatherby closed her eyes and put one finger to the page as if to keep her place in a story that had reached its ugly chapter. Mrs. Latchford wept quietly into an unhemmed handkerchief. Greaves began a sentence and thought better of it. Field looked, for once, not like a man passing through, but like a witness. Poirot bowed, very small. "I have finished," he said simply. "Inspector, the rest is for you." Creel stepped forward, heavy and official, yet not unhuman. "Margaret Rawlinson," he said, and the name sounded like a bell struck in a quiet church. "I must ask you to come with me." She stood without argument. "I should like," she said, 10 minutes to put my things in order." "No," Poirot said, almost tender. "There have been enough of those." Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. There is a stillness that follows the striking of a bell, a hush that is not silence but the settling of sound into certainty. The writing room wore that stillness after Creel's words. Mrs. Rawlinson stood very straight, the calm of a woman who has always met the day dressed for it. Her husband's hand half lifted, then fell. Discipline came late to him, but came. "Mr. Harcourt?" Poirot said, turning aside from the tableau with the tact of a maitre d' removing a superfluous glass. "You will be so good as to place the miniature and the unsigned codicil in your case, and keep them until the inquest. After that, the law will decide the path for E. But not into fire, at least." Harcourt's mouth tightened. "The firm will see to the safeguarding, Mr. Poirot, and to the finding of the man, if he lives." He closed the leather with a precise snap that sounded, in that room, like an oath. "Inspector," said Poirot softly, "if we permit, Madame will wish to go first to her room, for her coat only. Then perhaps you will conduct her by the back stairs." He looked to Mrs. Rawlinson, meeting her eyes without pride. There need be no parade. Creel weighed, then nodded. "Very well." He gestured to a constable. "Taylor." But before the man could move, Mr. Rawlinson stepped into the space between his wife and the door with an alacrity that, in another setting, might have been gallant. "Inspector," he said in a voice he meant to be firm, "this is absurd. My wife did not leave our room last night. If you must make a scene, make it with me. I set the clock. I wrote the note. I sealed whatever you like with whatever color wax you happen to prefer. Edward," said Mrs. Rawlinson very quietly. "No." Poirot did not smile. "Monsieur, it is not a day for chivalry performed at the expense of geometry. The scissors that cut the ribbon tails for the knot at Mrs. Burnley's throat bite left. Your nails are filed on the right. The graphite on the bolt was smeared by a gloved thumb too small for your hand. The minute you tried to give me at dinner, when we spoke of the clock, you forgot to be precise. Your wife forgets nothing." He tipped his head a degree. "There is honor in wishing to share a burden. The law cannot allow you to pick it up." Mr. Rawlinson flushed the hot red of a man whose ease has been lifted like a rug to show the bare boards beneath. He turned to his wife. "Let me at least—" "You will let me," she said, with that tender severity that had the shape of kindness without the softness. "I will not be improved." Creel moved then, his hand as gentle as a man of his size allows. "Mrs. Rawlinson." He did not add the formula. He did not need to. The constable fell in behind. They went without incident, but the corridor seemed, as they passed, to draw itself to a line the way her ribbon-tails did. Exact, inevitable. The room released its breath in the untidy way people do when no one is watching. Mrs. Latchford wept openly now, her embroidery sodden where it lay in her lap. Miss Weatherby's pencil made, with a swiftness that was almost a sob, the smallest stroke at the corner of a mouth she had not been drawing. Colonel Thurston remained upright, but upright as men do on deck when the ship lists unexpectedly. Greaves found his tongue first. Vanity, like ivy, regains its purchase quickly. Well, I hope everyone will remember that I said from the first— Poirot raised a hand without looking at him. It was not a command. It was simply an end. Greaves, to his own surprise, obeyed it. Field came away from the window at last, the traveller stepping from his platform into a city he had not meant to visit. "If it eases anyone," he said levelly, "the Elias in that oval, the sailor, he is not a phantom. I met a man by that name last winter at Las Palmas, older than the portrait, scar along the brow, but the eyes were a rhyme. He spoke once of a Cornish woman who married above her liking and below her temper." He glanced at Harcourt. "I can make inquiries when I next go south." Harcourt's reserve softened a fraction. "The firm will be grateful for any thread that leads to him, or to his widow, if it comes to that." Colonel Thurston's jaw worked. "And if the legacy, if this instrument, had the effect of stripping Mrs. Burnley's other beneficiaries?" Harcourt answered in the dry tone of men who sleep with statutes under their pillows. "A codicil does what it says. It may narrow, it may broaden, it may, if worded badly, invite the ruin of a family dinner. That is why we draft carefully and sign only in daylight." He closed his case again, fastidiously. "In this instance, no one is stripped of anything by what was never signed." Poirot's gaze had gone to Mrs. Latchford, who wept now without fret about tears on silk. He took from the table a clean handkerchief. His own, it was finer than the hotel's, and offered it with a little bow. "Madame, you have been very brave. Would you like to sit where the air is quieter?" "I thank you," she managed, and allowed him to lead her to a chair nearer the inner corner, away from the sea's white stare. He turned back to the knot that remained. Greaves, who had pawned the false locket and tied the green bow. Miss Weatherby, whose honesty was line and shade. The Colonel, whose moral rigour had suffered a bruise. Field, who could travel away from this tomorrow, and might. "Monsieur Greaves," Poirot said in a tone that made even that florid soul incline his head, "you have had an adventure that did not belong to you. The police will speak with Mr. Quirke about the matter of the locket. It was not Mrs. Burnley's, it was, I think, yours, long pledged in hope, redeemed in vanity, sent back to hope again. You will apologize to the inspector for wasting his time with times that did not agree." Greaves swallowed. Yes, of course." He looked down, saw for the first time the powder on his cuff as if it belonged to a stranger. "Miss Weatherby," Poirot went on, "you heard footsteps because you listen. If you should wish, later, to set the cliffs aside and draw people for a time, the law courts of London have need of artists who see what is between faces." He gave her a smile that admitted the sadness of the compliment. She smiled back, not trusting her voice, and pressed her pencil against the page to keep from crying like a schoolgirl. "And you, mon colonel," Poirot said at last, turning the lightest of his reproaches upon the stiffest of men. "You will be kind to yourself when you remember that a woman you admired chose a 10 minutes that ended poorly. Honor and dignity are brothers, yes, but not twins. You served one. She doubted the other. There is pain in that." The Colonel made an inarticulate sound. At last he said, with the humility of a man whose boots have been shined by a private and whose soul has been buffed by truth, "I misjudged several. I shall write to your Dr. Bull. Fallen to say so." "Write to yourself," Field murmured, and for once the Colonel did not rebuke him. Creel returned within the quarter hour, his face the face of a man who has done a necessary thing without enjoyment. "She is in the manager's office for now," he said. "We'll take her down after luncheon. Mr. Rawlinson remains in their room." He looked at Poirot, and in that look was respect and the faint, particular weariness reserved for cases the newspapers call simple and are nothing of the kind. "You have a way of making everyone feel seen, Mr. Poirot. It makes the rest heavier and lighter at once." Poirot lifted a palm. "It is nothing. One introduces people to their better selves and sometimes to their true. The better is shy. The true is stubborn." "Will it stand?" Creel asked, meaning the case, not the furniture. "It will stand," Poirot said. "The letter, the packet, the wax, the bolt, the clock, the ribbon, the bruise, the left-hand cut, each proves little alone. Together they sing, and Madame Rawlinson's ear, alas, is perfect for pitch. She could not bear my false note of 312. She corrected me. That is confession in the key she prefers." They parted for a time, as hotels make people do even on days when life gathers them by the scruff. Creel took statements. Harcourt wrote a brief for the partner who had not trusted a clerk with it. Bennet composed himself to deal with letters of cancellation that would surely arrive by the evening post. Mr. Rawlinson remained invisible. The door of his room, it was said, shut not with a slam, but with the small, careful click of a man practicing a new habit. Poirot went upstairs to Mrs. Burnley's room one last time. He stood in the doorway and let the room tell him nothing new. The oval space in the velvet roll remained empty. The pressed violet under the lamp had grown brittle as a decision that cannot be amended. He looked at the bed, the right-hand imprint, the left-hand plainness, and set a hand for the first time upon the counterpane. "Madame," he said under his breath, "you wish to sign in daylight. It is some justice that your night will not have the last word." Downstairs, as noon approached, there was a small flurry at the desk, the sort of bustle hotels prefer, because it can be done with ledgers and does not require souls. Temple and James's messenger returned with a note. Harcourt read it and nodded once as if a cog had turned. "We have an address for Elias," he told Poirot. "If the man lives, he will be found." "Bon," Poirot said simply. Miss Weatherby came to him shyly, the sketch-book in her hands. On the page he saw not faces but objects. The clock back open to reveal the card under the bell, the bolt with its smear like a dirty pearl, a ribbon tail showing the left-hand bite, the little crease on the pillow like a signature. "I thought," she said, "that if anyone asked me why I believed you, I could show them this." "Keep it," Poirot said, touched more than he showed. "One should always keep the picture of a truth one has seen." Mrs. Latchford approached with damp courage. "Mr. Poirot, I cannot bear that it should all be horrid. Was there anything kind?" Poirot considered. "Yes," he said at last. "Mrs. Burnley wished to be exact. Exactness is a kind of respect, for the living and for the dead. She chose a time. She chose a place. She chose witnesses born of paper and of wax. It is not softness, but it is honor. We will give her that." The luncheon gong sounded with a melancholy that may have been in the ear, not the metal. People moved because people must. Creel touched Poirot's sleeve. "After we've eaten, I'll take her." Poirot nodded. "I will walk to the door and no further. I do not attend farewells that are only beginnings of rooms with bars." He did as he said. At 2, when Bennet stood with that sad professional poise peculiar to hoteliers and undertakers, Creel led Mrs. Rawlinson down the side passage. She wore her coat, her hat sat square. She did not look left or right. When she reached the threshold, she paused, not to plead, not to look back at her husband. He had not come, but to adjust, with the smallest movement, the tilt of the bouquet in the hall vase. It was, Poirot understood, the last ribbon she would tie in the Glendower. "Madame," he said, and inclined his head. She inclined hers in return. Then she was gone. Outside, the sea went on with its old business of lifting and laying down. Inside, the hotel altered itself by fractions, the way a face does when the person who wore it has left the room. The bed upstairs lay as it had lain. The clock in the lounge, innocent creature, ticked as if clocks were meant for time and not for theatre. Poirot stood a moment more in the writing room, alone now save for the bays and the ghost of violets. He touched the blotter as a priest touches stone and thought, with a sadness that did not drown him, that justice had been done, and that it was the narrow kind justice often is, exact but not warm. He drew himself up and smoothed his sleeve. "Come," he told the little grey cells. "We have one more duty, to say what must be said and to say it kindly." And with that, he went to find Inspector Creel, for the closing of a case is not the end of its people, and a man may as well be precise in farewell. Chapter 18. The last word of the case. The hotel had softened by evening, as though it too sought to draw a curtain over the day. Lamps were lit low in the lounge, throwing warm puddles of light onto polished wood. The air smelled faintly of the sea's breath, and the polish Bennett had applied with more vigor than usual, as if the gleam could erase memory. Guests spoke in careful tones, skirting the subject that had consumed them all mere hours ago. Poirot sat alone at a corner table, his small coffee cup before him, untouched. Across from him, Inspector Creel had joined, his broad frame folded awkwardly into the lounge's refined armchair. The two men had been silent for several moments, but the silence between them was not idle. It was the quiet of men turning over the final pieces of a puzzle already solved. "She confessed more than you needed," Creel said at last, his voice low. "I think she wanted to. As if, once you set the clock right, she knew there was no sense pretending." Poirot nodded. "It is often so. People will fight until the detail they hold most dear is tampered with. For Madame Rawlinson, it was her precision, the perfect minute, the symmetry of her knot, the knowledge that no one could best her arrangements. When I altered one small truth, she could not let it stand. That was her undoing. And all this," Creel mused, "because Mrs. Burnley intended to change her will." "Ah, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "The changing of a will is like altering the wind's direction. It does not happen without resistance. Madame Rawlinson feared the loss of influence more than she feared the gallows. To her, it was not only the money. It was the insult, the suggestion that her husband's standing was reduced. Pride, you see, is a poor guardian of morality." Creel exhaled heavily, glancing toward the doorway where Mrs. Rawlinson had last been seen. "The husband, do you think he knew?" Poirot considered. "No. He suspected nothing until the moment she refused his gallantry. A man may live beside a clever woman for years and never see the sharpness of her knife, until it cuts someone else." Harcourt entered then, briefcase in hand, and approached the two men. "Mr. Poirot, I thought you should know. The messenger has returned from Cornwall. Elias is alive. The firm will arrange for him to receive what Mrs. Burnley intended. It will not replace the manner of her death, but—" He let the sentence trail into the air. Poirot's expression softened. "Then something is salvaged, mon cher. In these affairs, one must gather what fragments one can." As Harcourt departed, the evening pressed on. Bennett drifted past to see if the detective required anything further, and Poirot declined with a small wave of the hand. He was thinking now not of the crime, but of its edges, the people whose lives would bend subtly in its wake. Miss Weatherby, who would remember that footsteps in a corridor can change the course of an entire day. Mrs. Latchford, who would perhaps find less pleasure in embroidery after seeing a ribbon tied to kill. Field, who would carry a story of Elias in his pocket until the man could tell his own. Creel stood, adjusting his coat. "You've given me a case that will be talked about for years. Not for its violence, but for how neatly it was done. And undone." Poirot rose too, buttoning his jacket with delicate precision. Order, Inspector, is not only in how we arrange our facts. It is also in how we leave them, tidy enough that the living may continue." They shook hands, and Creel left. Poirot lingered for a moment longer, gazing at the mantel clock in the lounge. It ticked evenly, innocent of the deception its cousin upstairs had endured. He thought of Mrs. Burnley, her exact ways, her wish to sign in daylight. There was, in the end, a strange kind of respect in keeping her last hour exact, even if the manner of its ending was far from what she planned. Poirot stepped out into the night. The sea lay dark and untroubled, the tide whispering at the edge of the stones. Above, a pale moon had risen, silvering the path ahead. The air was cool, sharp with salt, and each step away from the Glendower felt like the measured closing of a chapter. Behind him, the hotel lights glimmered, holding within their walls a story already fading into memory for most, yet one he would keep, precise and whole, in the neat compartments of his little grey cells. For justice, when done properly, leaves no ragged edge. And with that thought, Hercule Poirot walked on, the night folding around him like the final page of a well-ordered book.